You ever watch a man crumble under the weight of his own choices? Not the dramatic kind of collapse you see in bad theater. No speeches, no thundering music, just the slow, grinding erosion of a soul that thought it could outrun consequences. That's the story you're about to step into. And I promise you this, by the end, you'll understand why some secrets don't deserve to stay buried, and why the people we think we know best are often the ones we've never truly seen at all. Stay with me on this. It gets darker before it gets light. The winter morning, Eveline Ashbourne found the package. Frost had painted the palace windows into something resembling shattered glass. Appropriate considering what was about to break. She sat in her private chambers, 8 months swollen with the air everyone had been waiting for, her fingers tracing the edge of the cream-colored box that had appeared on her writing desk sometime between dawn and breakfast. No card, no messenger's name logged in the palace records. Just this beautiful, terrible thing wrapped in silk ribbon, the color of old bruises. Inside lay a dress so small it could fit in her palm. White linen, hand-stitched lace at the collar, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of hours bent over candlelight, needle and thread moving with the precision of prayer. She lifted it to the window light, and that's when her breath caught. Embroidered along the inner collar in thread so fine she almost missed it. For baby Lucien, the room tilted. Not physically. She was still sitting, still breathing, but something fundamental shifted in the architecture of her reality. Only 2 people in the entire kingdom knew that name, her and Cedric. They'd chosen it 3 weeks ago in this very room, doors locked, windows shuttered, speaking in whispers like criminals plotting treason. The name hadn't been announced, hadn't been written down, hadn't even been spoken aloud except to each other. So who the hell had embroidered it into a dress that arrived like a ghost calling card? Eveline's fingers trembled as she turned the fabric over, examining the stitchwork with the trained eye of a woman raised in noble courts where embroidery was both art and language. The pattern was distinctive, a 3-strand chain stitch interwoven with seed pearls at specific intervals. She'd seen that technique before. Memorized it, actually, because it had once belonged to a woman the entire court had been obsessed with. Lady Celine Whitmore. The name arrived in her mind fully formed, dragging with it 2 years of half-remembered scandal and whispers cut short whenever Eveline entered a room. Celine Whitmore, whose beauty had been legendary, whose embroidery had been coveted, whose disappearance had been convenient. The official story: she'd retired to a countryside estate after her father's death, a quiet withdrawal from court life. Nothing unusual for a grieving noblewoman seeking solitude. The unofficial story, the one that had circulated through the palace like poison in the bloodstream, was that she'd been Cedric's mistress, that their affair had nearly ignited a scandal violent enough to shake the monarchy's foundations, that powerful men had made sure she vanished before the damage became irreparable. Eveline had believed the official story because she'd needed to, because she'd married Cedric 6 months after Celine's departure, and couldn't afford to build a life on a foundation of doubt. But now this dress sat in her hands like evidence at a trial. She pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her ribs. Lucien, her son. The heir who was supposed to secure everything, the title, the legacy, the future Cedric had promised her. Except someone else knew his name. Someone who'd taken the time to stitch it into cotton meant for infant skin. The door opened without warning. Eveline's hands instinctively clutched the dress against her chest as Cedric entered, already dressed in riding leathers, his hair still damp from washing. He looked tired. He always looked tired lately. Shadows carved beneath his eyes, like someone had hollowed him out with a spoon. He's 34 years old and he looks 50, she thought. When did that happen? Cedric, can we talk? He was halfway to the wardrobe, reaching for his jacket. About what? His tone wasn't dismissive exactly. Just elsewhere. Like his body had entered the room, but his mind remained wherever he'd been before dawn. About where you've been going. That stopped him. His hand froze on the jacket's collar, and for just a breath, maybe 2, something like fear crossed his face before the Duke's mask slid back into place. I've been managing estate business. You know this. Estate business that requires you to leave before sunrise 3 times a week. A state business that has you returning after midnight smelling like wood smoke and pine. She hadn't meant to say it like that, sharp, accusatory, the words coming out jagged with the kind of suspicion she'd been swallowing for months. But the dress was still warm in her hands, and her patience had finally found its limit. Cedric turned fully toward her now, and his expression did something complicated. Not quite guilt, not quite anger, something that lived in the space between. "What are you implying, Evelyn?" She stood, which was harder than it used to be with this much weight shifting her center of gravity. The dress fell from her hands onto the chair behind her. She didn't pick it up. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Where have you been going? You're 8 months pregnant. You should be resting, not what? Not asking questions about my own husband? Not noticing that you barely sleep in our bed anymore? Not wondering why you flinch every time someone mentions the hunting lodge?" That last part landed. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders drew up like a man bracing for impact. "The hunting lodge has needed repairs," Cedric said slowly. "I've been overseeing the work personally. For 6 months? It's extensive damage. So extensive you can't delegate it to the estate manager? So urgent it requires you to vanish before dawn without telling your pregnant wife where you're going?" The silence that followed was the kind that drowns people. Cedric crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands. His grip was warm, firm, the hands of a man who'd learned early how to project certainty even when he felt none. "Evelyn," he said quietly, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. "I need you to trust me. Just a little longer. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now." She pulled her hands free. "Why?" "Because some things are more complicated than they appear. Try me. I'm smarter than you think." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or exhaustion so profound it had started wearing his features thin. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked to the door. "I have to go," he said without looking back. "I'll be home tonight." "Cedric, tonight, Evelyn." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut with the kind of finality that sounds like ending. She stood there in the empty room, her hands resting on her belly, feeling Lucian kick against her palm, like he was already trying to fight his way into a world that didn't make sense. Then she turned and picked up the dress from the chair. For baby Lucian. Someone new. Someone close enough to have access to information that shouldn't exist outside these walls. Someone skilled enough to send a message that only Evelyn would understand. And that someone had Lady Celine Whitmore's hands. Porque se desertai unchoice. 3 days passed before Evelyn made her decision. 3 days of watching Cedric leave at dawn and return after dark, his clothes smelling like cold air, and something else she couldn't name. Desperation, maybe, or the particular exhaustion that comes from maintaining a lie too heavy to carry. She tried questioning the staff. The chambermaids gave her nothing. The kitchen workers knew less than nothing. Even Margaret, her lady's maid, who'd been with her since childhood, seemed suddenly allergic to gossip. But Evelyn wasn't stupid. She'd grown up in a court where information moved like currency, and she'd learned early how to watch the things people didn't say. So she watched the food deliveries. On the 4th morning, she positioned herself in the east corridor where she had a clear view of the service entrance. Wrapped in a heavy cloak despite the indoor warmth, hood drawn low, she waited. Just past dawn, a cart arrived. Not the usual supply wagon from the village. This one was smaller, nondescript, driven by a man she didn't recognize. 2 servants she'd never seen before unloaded crates of provisions, more than usual, expensive cuts of meat, fresh vegetables that cost a fortune this time of year, imported oil, honey, things you didn't waste on staff meals or storage reserves. "Where's this going?" she asked one of the younger kitchen boys, hauling the crates inside. The boy nearly dropped his load. "Your Grace, I didn't—" "Relax, I'm just asking. Storage, milady. Same as always." "Which storage?" The boy's eyes went wide. He was maybe 15, all limbs and nervous energy, the kind of kid who'd crack under pressure faster than thin ice. "I don't know the name," he stammered. "Just out past the stables. The old storeroom near the hunting grounds?" His silence was confirmation enough. That afternoon, Evelyn told Margaret she needed rest and locked her chamber door from the inside. Then she changed into the plainest dress she owned, wrapped herself in a cloak that hid the swell of her belly, and slipped out through the servants' passage she'd discovered during her first month at the palace. The hunting lodge was 2 miles into the forest, accessible by a road that had once been maintained but now barely qualified as a path. She walked it slowly, one hand braced against her lower back, the other clutching her cloak closed against the winter air that cut through fabric like it wasn't there. By the time she reached the clearing where the lodge sat, a sprawling stone structure built generations ago, When Ashbourne Duke still pretended to enjoy killing things for sport, her feet ached and her breath came in visible clouds. But she'd been right. Smoke rose from the chimney. Curtains hung in windows that should have been shuttered. A small vegetable garden, dormant for winter but clearly tended, stretched along the south wall. Someone lived here. Eveline approached slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open. Inside, the lodge had been transformed. Not into luxury, nothing about this place screamed wealth, but into something functional. Lived in. A fire crackled in the hearth. Shelves held books and folded linens. A child's wooden horse sat abandoned near the sofa, carved with the unmistakable Ashbourne family crest. Her breath stopped. "Hello?" The voice came from upstairs. Female. Cautious but not afraid. Eveline moved toward the staircase just as footsteps descended. And then, there she was. Lady Selene Whitmore. 2 years older than the last time Eveline had seen her. Hair longer, face thinner, but unmistakably her. Those pale green eyes that had inspired a dozen terrible poems still sharp and wary as a wild animal's. They stared at each other across the space of the entryway. Neither spoke. What do you even say in a moment like this? What language exists for the collision of suspicion and confirmation, the moment your worst fears solidify into flesh and blood standing 3 feet away? Finally, Selene broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Eveline's hand tightened on the stair railing. "Neither should you. You're supposed to be dead. Or at least gone." Selene's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Gone, yes. Dead? Not yet. Why?" Eveline's voice cracked. "Why are you here? Why is Cedric—" She couldn't finish. The question was too big, the implications too vast. But Selene understood. "Mama?" The small voice came from the top of the stairs. Both women turned. The boy was maybe 5 years old. Dark hair that curled at the ends. A serious face that hadn't yet learned how to hide emotion. And eyes. God, those eyes. Gray as winter sky. Exactly like Cedric's. Eveline's knees went weak. She grabbed the railing with both hands to keep from falling. The boy descended slowly, watching Eveline with the careful curiosity of a child who'd been taught to be wary of strangers. When he reached Selene, he pressed against her side, and she wrapped one arm around his shoulders in a gesture so natural it screamed years of practice. "Go back upstairs, Oliver," Selene said gently. "Now." "But who?" "Now." The boy obeyed, casting one last glance at Eveline before disappearing. "Oliver?" Eveline whispered. She felt like someone had reached into her chest and rearranged her organs. Her son. Cedric's son. Selene's face remained carefully neutral. "You need to leave." "No." Eveline's voice came out stronger than she felt. "No, I need you to explain what the hell is happening, why you're here, why Cedric has been lying to me for... How long? How long has this been going on? You don't understand? Then make me understand." The shout surprised them both. Eveline never raised her voice. She'd been trained from childhood that noble women controlled their emotions the way generals controlled armies, with precision, strategy, and an iron grip. But right now she was done controlling anything. Selene stared at her for a long moment. Then she crossed to the sofa and sat, her movements careful, economical, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. "Fine," she said quietly, "but you're not going to like what you hear. Try me." So Selene told her. The affair, if you could even call it that, had lasted 3 months. "Not love," Selene said flatly. "Not even close. We were both lonely, both trapped in a court that chewed people up and spit them out when they stopped being useful." Eveline sat across from her, hands folded in her lap, trying to keep her face neutral even as every word landed like a punch. Cedric had just lost his father. Selene had just ended an engagement to a man who'd made it clear he viewed her as property. They'd found each other at the exact moment when being found felt like survival. "And then I got pregnant," Selene continued. Her voice remained steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twisting in her lap. "By the time I knew, rumors had already started. Someone at court, I never found out who, had seen us together. Not doing anything particularly damning, but enough. And in that world, enough is everything." "What happened?" Celine's laugh was bitter. What do you think happened? Powerful people decided I was a problem, that a bastard child attached to the Ashbourne name would cause complications they didn't want to navigate. So they gave Cedric a choice: publicly disown me and let them handle the situation, or watch his entire political future burn. Handle the situation, Evelyn repeated slowly. You mean kill you? Celine met her eyes. Yes. The room fell silent except for the fire crackling in the hearth and the wind outside scraping branches against stone. Evelyn's mind raced through the implications. So Cedric hid you. He saved me, saved Oliver. Bought this lodge under a false name, arranged for supplies, hired staff who owed him enough to keep their mouths shut. And he's been protecting us ever since. While building a life with me, the words came out hollow, not angry, not hurt, just empty, like she'd used up all her emotional capacity and now ran on fumes. Celine's expression softened slightly. He never lied to you about loving you, if that's what you're thinking. Whatever we had ended the moment he met you. I've been a responsibility for him, not a relationship. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand the position he's in. Celine leaned forward, her voice urgent. He's been trying to keep 3 people alive, me, Oliver, and you, in a system designed to punish exactly this kind of complication. He's not a villain, Evelyn. He's just a man who made impossible choices in an impossible situation. And the dress? Evelyn's voice went cold. The one with Lucian's name embroidered in it? Celine had the grace to look guilty. That was my mistake. I don't know what I wanted. To remind him, maybe, that Oliver exists. That hiding us away doesn't make us less real. It was stupid, cruel. I'm sorry. You're sorry. Evelyn stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the forest stretched in every direction, bare branches like veins against gray sky. All this time, she said quietly, I thought I was building something real. A marriage. A family. A life that meant something beyond political strategy and bloodlines. You were, Celine said. You are. No. Evelyn turned back and her voice was ice. I was building a life on top of a lie. And the worst part? The part that makes me want to burn this entire place down? He let me. He watched me plan our son's future, decorate a nursery, imagine what kind of mother I'd be, all while knowing he already had a son hidden in the woods like some shameful secret. He was trying to protect. Don't! Evelyn snapped. Don't defend him to me right now. I don't care what his reasons were. I care that he made me complicit in a lie I didn't even know I was living. Footsteps on the porch interrupted them. Both women froze. The door opened. Cedric entered, snow dusting his shoulders, his face drawn with exhaustion. He stopped when he saw them together. For a moment, no one moved. The 3 of them formed a triangle of tension so thick it felt physical, like the air itself had solidified into something crushing. Then Cedric closed the door behind him. Evelyn, he said carefully, we need to talk. She laughed, actually laughed, the sound harsh and jagged. Now you want to talk? After months of lies? After I had to track you down like some detective hunting a criminal? I was trying to protect you. By treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth? By keeping you separate from something that could destroy you? His voice cracked on the last word. He looked broken, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking slightly as he dragged them through his hair. You think I don't know what they'd do if they found out? He continued, quieter now. You think I haven't spent every single day for 2 years terrified that someone would follow me here? That someone would connect the dots and decide the easiest solution was to eliminate everyone involved? So your solution was to keep me in the dark? To let me walk around pregnant and oblivious while you juggled 2 families like it was some kind of game? It's not a game! Cedric crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was gentle but desperate. It's survival. For all of us. Let go of me. Evelyn, let go. He released her immediately, stepping back like she'd burned him. Evelyn straightened her cloak, her breathing ragged. I'm going back to the palace, she said flatly. And when I get there, I'm going to decide whether I'm staying or leaving. Whether Lucian grows up with a father who lies to him or a mother who had the strength to walk away from something broken. You can't leave. Watch me. She moved toward the door. Cedric didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed her out into the cold. I never wanted to hurt you. She paused on the threshold without turning around. Then you shouldn't have married me while your heart was still buried in the woods. The walk back felt longer, colder. Every step reminded her of the weight she carried, both the child in her belly and the truth that had just been unloaded onto her shoulders like stones meant to drown. By the time she reached the palace, night had fallen. Margaret was waiting in her chambers, frantic with worry. "Your Grace, where have you been? I've been—" "Not now, Margaret, but His Grace has been looking for—" "I said not now." Margaret fell silent, eyes wide. Evelyn never snapped at her, never raised her voice to anyone, actually, because noble women didn't do that. Noble women smiled and swallowed and suffered in silence. But Evelyn was done swallowing. She dismissed Margaret, locked her door, and collapsed into the chair by the window. Her hands found her belly automatically, rubbing slow circles the way she did when Lucian got restless. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the child who couldn't answer. "How do I raise you in a world this broken?" The baby kicked. Once. Twice. Like he was trying to tell her something she didn't have the language to understand yet. Outside her window, snow began to fall. Silent, relentless, covering everything in white until the world looked clean again, even though underneath nothing had changed at all. Eveline didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, her mind turning over every conversation, every lie. Every moment she'd dismissed her own instincts because it was easier than confronting what they implied. Around 3 a.m, she heard footsteps in the corridor. They paused outside her door. Cedric's voice low and broken. "Evelyn, please." She didn't answer. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. When dawn came, she rose and dressed herself. No Margaret, no help, just her, and clothing that barely fit anymore. Then she walked to Cedric's study and entered without knocking. He was at his desk, head in his hands, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He looked up when she entered, hope and fear warring in his expression. "I have conditions," Evelyn said without preamble. Cedric straightened. "Anything. First, no more lies, ever. I don't care how ugly the truth is. You tell me. Done. Second, Oliver comes to the palace. That stopped him cold. Evelyn, that's non-negotiable. If he's your son, he deserves to be acknowledged. Hiding him away like he's shameful is cruel. To him and to everyone else. The court will—" "Damn the court!" Her voice rose. "If they have a problem with it, they can take it up with me. But I will not let that child grow up thinking he's worth less than Lucian just because his mother wasn't the right kind of noble." Cedric stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You'd do that? Risk the scandal?" "I'm already in the scandal. I just didn't know it until yesterday." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "But here's the thing, Cedric. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because children don't deserve to pay for their parents' mistakes. And if Oliver is part of this family, then he's part of this family. Fully. No asterisks." Something in Cedric's expression shifted. Not quite hope, not quite relief, but something adjacent to both. "And Celine?" he asked quietly. "Stays at the lodge if she wants. I'm not going to force her into court life. But she gets full support, money, security, whatever she needs. You'd do that for her too?" Evelyn's laugh was hollow. "I'm not doing it for her either. I'm doing it because I refuse to become the kind of person who punishes another woman for a man's choices." Silence settled between them, heavy but not quite hostile. Finally, Cedric spoke. "I don't deserve you." "No," Evelyn agreed, "you don't. But Lucian deserves a father who knows how to be honest. So you're going to learn, starting now." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," she said without looking back. "If you ever, and I mean ever, keep something like this from me again, I will take both boys and disappear so completely you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if we ever existed at all." Then she left him sitting in the wreckage of his own making. The announcement came 3 days later. Duke Cedric Ashbourne stood before the assembled court, Evelyn beside him, her hand resting lightly on her belly, where Lucian continued his restless movements. The nobles watched with the predatory attention of sharks smelling blood in the water. Cedric's voice was steady, clear, unflinching. "I stand before you today to acknowledge a truth I have kept hidden for too long. 5 years ago, I became a father. The child's mother is Lady Celine Whitmore. His name is Oliver, and he is my son." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, a few barely concealed expressions of triumph from nobles who'd been waiting years for the Ashbourne family to stumble. But before the chaos could fully erupt, Evelyn stepped forward. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. My husband has made mistakes. He has kept secrets that caused pain. But I stand here today to tell you all that those secrets end now. Oliver Ashbourne will be raised alongside our son Lucian. They will be brothers, equals. And anyone who attempts to use this situation to harm either child will answer to me personally. The silence that followed was deafening. Eveline met the eyes of every noble in the room, one by one, daring any of them to challenge her. No one spoke. Even the ones who'd been smiling moments before seemed to realize they'd miscalculated something fundamental about the woman standing before them. This isn't a scandal, Eveline continued. This is a family choosing honesty over comfort. And if that makes us vulnerable in your eyes, then so be it. We will survive your judgment the same way we've survived everything else. Together. She took Cedric's hand, not a romantic gesture, a strategic one, a message carved in flesh. We are unified, we are unbreakable, and we will not be destroyed by the same system that created this mess in the first place. Slowly, the court began to disperse. Some nobles looked disappointed, others looked grudgingly impressed. But all of them understood that something had shifted in the balance of power. The Ashbourne family had just rewritten the rules. That night, Eveline went into labor. It started as a dull ache in her lower back around midnight, then escalated into contractions that felt like her body was trying to turn itself inside out. Margaret sent for the midwife. Cedric paced the corridor outside her chambers like a caged animal. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Eveline found herself thinking about Oliver. About the fact that this child, her child, Lucian, would enter a world where he already had a brother he'd never met. About the complexity they were inheriting before they'd even taken their first breath. The labor lasted 11 hours. When it finally ended, when the midwife placed a screaming, red-faced infant in her arms, Eveline looked down at her son and felt something crack open inside her chest. He was perfect, tiny, and furious, and perfect. Cedric entered carefully, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and something that might have been tears. He approached the bed slowly, like he was afraid she'd tell him to leave. Instead, Eveline shifted slightly, making room. "Come meet your son." Cedric sat beside her, staring at Lucian with an expression of such raw wonder it made him look young again. Younger than she'd ever seen him, all the masks stripped away until only the man underneath remained. "He's beautiful," Cedric whispered. "He is." Eveline leaned her head against Cedric's shoulder, too exhausted to maintain the distance she'd been holding between them. For now, just for now, she let herself exist in this moment, in the miracle of new life and the tentative possibility that broken things might eventually heal. Outside, dawn broke over the palace. Inside, a family began the slow, painful process of becoming whole. 3 weeks later, Oliver arrived at the palace. He came in a carriage with Celine, both of them dressed simply, neither looking particularly comfortable with the attention. Eveline watched from the window as they approached, noting the way Oliver held his mother's hand tightly, his small face serious and wary. She'd spent the last weeks preparing, had a room set up for the boy near Lucian's nursery, had instructed the staff on exactly how he was to be treated, not as a secret, not as a shame, but as a member of the family who'd been away and was now coming home. When they entered the palace, Eveline met them in the main hall. Celine's eyes were guarded, but Oliver looked around with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child seeing something new and overwhelming. "Hello, Oliver," Eveline said gently, crouching down despite the lingering soreness from childbirth. "I'm Eveline. You can call me whatever feels comfortable." The boy studied her with those gray eyes that were so painfully familiar. "Are you the Duchess?" "I am. Mama says I'm supposed to live here now." "That's right." She smiled. "Would you like to meet your brother?" Something shifted in Oliver's expression, uncertainty giving way to cautious interest. "I have a brother?" "You do. His name is Lucian. He's very small right now, but he'll grow. And when he does, I think you two will have a lot of adventures together." Oliver considered this. Then, quietly, "Okay." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The months that followed were not easy. Court life remained hostile, whispers following the Ashbourne family like shadows. Several nobles attempted to use the situation as leverage, suggesting publicly that Cedric's judgment was compromised, that his position as Duke was unstable. But Evelyn had learned something important during those weeks of crisis. Vulnerability, when wielded correctly, could be a weapon stronger than any facade. She attended every court function with both boys when they were old enough, held Oliver's hand on one side and carried Lucian on the other, dared anyone to comment. A few tried. She shut them down with the kind of precision that reminded everyone exactly why you didn't underestimate a woman just because she smiled politely. Celine remained at the lodge, visiting occasionally, but never staying long. She and Evelyn maintained a careful distance, not quite friendship, not quite hostility. Something in between that worked because both women understood the value of pragmatism over sentiment. Cedric changed too, slowly, clumsily, but genuinely. He spent hours with both boys, teaching Oliver to ride, reading to Lucian even though the baby couldn't understand a word yet. And at night, lying beside Evelyn in the darkness, he'd talk about his father's death, about the pressure that had crushed him into someone he didn't recognize, about the moment he'd realized hiding Celine was both the most terrible and most necessary thing he'd ever done. "I can't undo it," he said one night. "I can't go back and make different choices. All I can do is try to be better going forward." Evelyn stared at the ceiling. "Better isn't enough." "I know, but it's a start." She felt his hand find hers in the dark. She didn't pull away. 2 years passed, then 3. Lucian grew into a serious child who watched everything with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. Oliver lost some of his wariness, though traces remained, a tendency to go quiet when rooms got too crowded, a habit of checking exits like he was always calculating escape routes. But together they were magic. They fought, of course. Brothers do. But they also defended each other with a ferocity that made the palace staff exchange knowing looks. When Oliver fell from a horse and broke his wrist, Lucian refused to leave his side for 3 days. When Lucian got sick with a fever that had the doctors worried, Oliver sat outside the nursery telling stories through the door until his voice went hoarse. They were brothers in the truest sense. Not because blood made them so, but because they chose it. And Evelyn, she watched them grow and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the naive kind. Not the fantasy that everything would be perfect, but the sturdy, resilient kind that survives because it's been tested and refused to break. One evening, she stood in the palace gardens watching the boys play some game involving wooden swords and a lot of dramatic death scenes. Cedric joined her, sliding his arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of someone who'd earned back that right through years of consistent effort. "You did this," he said quietly. "We did this." "No." He turned to face her. "You did this. You could have burned everything down, could have left, could have made me choose between my sons. Instead, you built something better from the wreckage. That's all you." Eveline watched Oliver tackle Lucian into the grass, both boys dissolving into laughter. She thought about the dress that had started everything, about the moment she'd stood in that hunting lodge and felt her entire world shatter, about the choice she had made to pick up the pieces and rearrange them into something new. "I didn't do it for you," she said finally. "I did it for them, for every child who ever got caught in the crossfire of adults making impossible decisions." "I know." They stood in silence for a while, watching the boys play as the sun set over the palace grounds, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Do you regret it?" Cedric asked. "Staying," Evelyn considered. "Some days, yes. Some days I look at you and still feel the sting of those lies. Still wonder if I made the right choice. And other days?" She turned to meet his eyes. "Other days I look at those boys and know that whatever pain we went through was worth it to give them this. A family that chose truth over comfort. That's not nothing." "No." Cedric's voice was rough. "It's everything." As they walked back toward the palace, the baby dress, carefully preserved and folded, rested in a trunk in Evelyn's chambers. She'd kept it, not as evidence of betrayal anymore, but as a reminder that secrets always find their way into the light, that truth, however painful, is always better than the alternative, and that sometimes the families we build from broken pieces are stronger than the ones we inherit intact. But that night, as she lay in bed with Cedric breathing steadily beside her and the palace quiet around them, a new letter arrived, slipped under her door, sealed with wax she didn't recognize. Inside, a single line in handwriting that made her blood run cold because she knew it had seen it before in documents she'd been told were destroyed. The boy is not the only secret he's keeping. The letter burned in her hands like it was made of something other than paper. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, the palace silent around her except for the sound of her own breathing. 3 years. 3 years of building something fragile and real from the wreckage of Cedric's lies. And now this. A single sentence that threatened to crack the foundation all over again. The boy is not the only secret he's keeping. Her first instinct was to crumple it, throw it in the fire, pretend she'd never seen it. That's what the old Eveline would have done. The one who'd learned early that sometimes ignorance was the only shield a noble woman had against a world designed to break her. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd walked into a hunting lodge 8 months pregnant and confronted a truth that could have destroyed her. She'd stood before the entire court and claimed a scandal as her own. She'd chosen honesty over comfort so many times it had become a reflex, like breathing. So instead of burning the letter, she read it again and again, looking for something, handwriting analysis, paper quality, any detail that might tell her who'd sent it. Nothing, just that single line in elegant script and a wax seal she didn't recognize. The door opened without warning. Cedric entered, already loosening his collar, exhaustion written into every line of his body. He stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" She held up the letter. "This arrived tonight." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took it from her hands. His expression shifted as he read, something fast and complicated passing over his features before the Duke's mask slid back into place. "It's nothing," he said, too quickly. "Someone trying to stir up old drama." "Really?" Evelyn stood, her voice sharp. "Because 3 years ago you said something very similar about food deliveries to the hunting lodge, and we both know how that turned out. This is different. How?" Cedric's jaw tightened. "Because I'm telling you it's nothing. Can't you just trust me on this?" The laugh that escaped her was harsh, jagged. "Trust you? You want me to trust you after everything we went through? After I had to track you down like some criminal because you couldn't be honest with me? That's not fair." "Fair?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You don't get to lecture me about fair. You lost that right when you built an entire second life behind my back and let me stumble into it blind. I was protecting you." "No." She jabbed a finger at his chest. "You were protecting yourself from having to make hard choices, from having to actually face the consequences of your actions. And now someone is telling me there's more, and you're standing here trying to gaslight me into believing it's nothing?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Cedric's hands curled into fists at his sides. His breathing had gone ragged, and for a moment she thought he might actually tell her the truth. But then his shoulders slumped and he turned away. "I can't do this right now," he said quietly. "I'm exhausted, Evelyn. Can we please just—" "No." Her voice cut through his retreat like a blade. "We're doing this now. Whatever this is, whatever you're hiding, I want to know. Tonight." "There's nothing to know." "Then why won't you look at me?" He didn't answer, just stood there with his back to her, every line of his body screaming guilt. Evelyn felt something inside her snap. Not dramatically, not with thunder and fire, just a clean, quiet break. The sound of patience finally reaching its limit. "Get out," she said. "Evelyn, get out of my room, now." He turned then, his eyes pleading. "If you would just listen." "I've been listening for 3 years. I listened when you told me Oliver was the only secret. I listened when you promised no more lies. I listened when you swore we were building something honest. And now I'm done listening because clearly nothing you say means a damn thing. That's not true." "Then prove it." She crossed her arms. "Tell me what this letter's about. Right now. No deflection. No excuses. Just the truth." Cedric opened his mouth, closed it. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing risks, measuring consequences, trying to find the path of least damage. And that calculation told her everything she needed to know. "You can't," she said flatly. "You literally can't tell me the truth because there's something worse than Oliver. Something you think will destroy us completely if I find out." His silence was confirmation. Evelyn moved to the door and opened it. "Get out. We need to talk about this." "No. What we need is for you to leave before I say something we can't come back from." Cedric stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked past her into the corridor, his footsteps echoing against stone as he disappeared into the darkness. Evelyn closed the door and locked it. Then she pressed her forehead against the wood and tried to remember how to breathe. "Much Morning came too fast. Evelyn woke to Margaret hovering anxiously by the bed, whispering something about the Duke requesting her presence at breakfast. "Tell him I'm indisposed." "But, Your Grace, he was quite insistent." "Margaret." Evelyn sat up, her voice firm. "Tell him exactly what I said. I'm indisposed. If he has something to discuss, he can put it in writing." Margaret's eyes went wide, but she curtsied and left. Evelyn dressed herself slowly, ignoring the ache in her temples that suggested last night's confrontation had cost her more than just sleep. Then she made her way to the nursery where both boys were having breakfast under the watchful eye of their governess. Lucian saw her first. His face lit up with the uncomplicated joy of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world was complicated and cruel. "Mama!" She gathered him into her arms, breathing in the clean soap smell of his hair. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Oliver watched from the table, quieter but no less pleased to see her. "Morning, Evelyn." She'd asked him to call her that rather than any formal title. It felt more honest somehow, less about positions and more about the strange, fragile thing they'd built together. "Morning, Oliver." She ruffled his hair as she passed, earning a rare smile. "You two behaving for Miss Caroline?" "Always," Oliver said solemnly, which was a lie. These two caused enough trouble to keep the entire staff on their toes. But it was the kind of trouble that made her heart feel less heavy. The kind that reminded her why she'd chosen to stay in the first place. She spent the morning with them, reading stories, playing games that involved a lot of dramatic sword fighting and even more dramatic death scenes. By noon, both boys were exhausted and Caroline was giving her grateful looks that said thank you for wearing them out so they'll actually nap. But when she returned to her chambers, the letter was still there on her desk, still mocking her with its single devastating line. She needed information, real information, the kind you couldn't get by asking politely. So she went looking for the one person in the palace who knew where all the bodies were buried. Thomas Graverly had been the Ashbourne family's steward for 40 years. He was 73, sharp as a knife despite his age, and possessed the kind of institutional knowledge that made him simultaneously invaluable and dangerous. Evelyn found him in his office, a cramped room buried deep in the palace's administrative wing that smelled like old paper and secrets. "Your Grace." He stood when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "How may I assist you?" She closed the door behind her. "I need to ask you something, off the record." His eyebrows rose fractionally. "That's an unusual request. These are unusual circumstances." She placed the letter on his desk. "Someone sent me this. I need to know if there's any truth to it." Thomas picked up the letter with hands that had gone slightly arthritic but remained steady. He read it once, twice, then set it down with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. "I see. That's all you have to say?" He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with eyes that had seen too much. "What would you like me to say, Your Grace? That the Duke is a paragon of honesty? We both know better. Is there something else he's hiding?" The silence stretched. Thomas folded his hands on the desk, and she could see him weighing loyalty against truth, a calculation he'd probably made 1,000 times over 4 decades of service. Finally, he spoke. "There are always things people hide, Your Grace. The question is whether knowing them helps or hurts. That's not an answer." "No." His smile was thin. "It's not. Thomas, please." She leaned forward. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding trust. 3 years trying to create something honest for those boys. If there's something that threatens that, I need to know. And if knowing destroys what you've built, then at least I'll know what I'm standing on." He studied her for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a file so old the edges had started to yellow. "This is everything I know about the situation with Lady Selene," he said carefully, "including details the Duke chose not to share with you, such as the fact that she wasn't the first woman he hid away, and Oliver wasn't the first child." The room tilted. Evelyn gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "What?" Thomas's expression was grim. 7 years ago, before you entered the picture, there was another woman, a merchant's daughter from the lower districts. She got pregnant. The Duke was younger then, more reckless. He tried to do the right thing, set her up with money, a home in the countryside. What happened to her? She died in childbirth. The baby survived. Evelyn's mouth had gone dry. "Where is the child now?" Thomas slid the file across the desk. That's what you need to read. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, birth records, death certificates, financial transactions, and a single piece of paper with an address written in Cedric's handwriting. An orphanage, 2 hours north of the palace. He abandoned his own child to an orphanage? He was 25 and terrified. Thomas's voice held no judgment, just facts. The mother's family wanted nothing to do with him. The court would have used it to destroy him, so he made a choice. A choice to pretend the child didn't exist. A choice to keep the child alive. Thomas met her eyes. Make no mistake, Your Grace, if the wrong people had found out about that baby, it would have been eliminated, permanently, just like they tried to do with Celine. Eveline stood abruptly, the chair scraping against stone. I need to see this child, Your Grace. I need to see them. Thomas, now, today. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly. I'll have a carriage prepared. But Your Grace? He waited until she looked at him. The Duke doesn't know I'm telling you this. I assumed as much. If you confront him, he'll know it came from me. Then I guess we'll both have to live with that. What? The orphanage sat at the edge of a small village, a gray stone building that looked exactly like what it was, a place where unwanted things got stored and forgotten. Eveline arrived just before sunset, her cloak drawn tight against the autumn wind. The woman who ran the place, Sister Agnes, though Eveline noticed no religious symbols anywhere, greeted her with the wary politeness of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions about wealthy benefactors. I'm looking for a child, Eveline said carefully. A girl. She would be about 7 now, dark hair, brought here as an infant. Sister Agnes's expression shuddered. We have several children matching that description. This one receives monthly payments from an anonymous donor. Substantial payments. Ah. The woman's mouth pressed into a thin line. You're here about Isabelle. Is she here? She's in the garden. But I should warn you, she doesn't know. I'm not here to tell her anything. I just need to see her. Sister Agnes led her through a corridor that smelled like boiled vegetables and carbolic soap, out into a small courtyard where a handful of children played. She pointed to a girl sitting alone beneath a tree, reading. That's Isabelle. Eveline's breath caught. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same dark hair as Cedric's, same sharp jawline, same intense focus when she concentrated. She was reading something far too advanced for a 7-year-old, her finger tracing lines as she mouthed words silently. Does she know about her father? She knows he's dead. Sister Agnes's voice was flat. That's what she was told, that both parents died and left her here. And she believed it? Children believe what they need to believe to survive. Eveline watched the girl turn a page, completely absorbed in whatever world the book offered. Something about the sight made her chest ache. This child who should have been running through palace gardens with Oliver and Lucian, playing with wooden swords and causing trouble. Instead, she was here, alone, reading beneath the tree because she'd been born to the wrong woman at the wrong time. Does anyone visit her? Eveline asked quietly. No, but the monthly payments always arrive on time. Sister Agnes paused. She's a good child. Smart. Too smart sometimes. She asks questions about where the money comes from. What do you tell her? That someone cares about her well-being, that she's not forgotten. But she is forgotten, isn't she? By everyone except whoever signs those checks. Sister Agnes didn't answer, didn't need to. Eveline watched Isabelle for another moment. Then she turned back toward the carriage. I need to speak with whoever manages the payments. That would be a solicitor in the capital. Mr. Blackwell. He handles all the arrangements. Get me his information. Your Grace, with respect, if the Duke finds out you've been here, then he should have been honest with me from the start. Boss. By the time she returned to the palace, night had fallen. She went straight to Cedric's study and entered without knocking. He was at his desk, papers spread before him, a glass of whiskey half empty at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, relief and apprehension warring in his expression. Eveline, thank God, I've been trying to reach you all day. Isabelle, she said flatly. The name hit him like a physical blow. All the color drained from his face. He set down his pen with a hand that had started trembling. How did you... Does it matter? No. He stood slowly. No, I suppose it doesn't. She closed the door behind her. 7 years old, living in an orphanage, reading alone under a tree because her father was too much of a coward to acknowledge she existed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Her voice rose. You made a child and then threw her away like she was trash, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a human being who deserved better. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Cedric? Enlighten me. Tell me how abandoning your own daughter to strangers was somehow the noble thing to do. He moved around the desk, his movements careful. I was 25. The girl's mother died. Her family wanted nothing to do with me. If I'd claimed Isabelle publicly, they would have killed her to prevent the scandal. So I found the safest place I could, somewhere she'd be cared for, protected, away from court politics. And you've been paying them off ever since. I've been keeping her alive. His voice cracked. Do you think I'm proud of this? Do you think I don't lie awake wondering what kind of man abandons his own child? Then why didn't you tell me? We went through everything with Oliver. We faced the court together. We built something honest. And the entire time you were hiding another child, because I knew this is how you'd react. Cedric's hands were shaking now. I knew you'd look at me exactly like you're looking at me right now, like I'm a monster who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as those boys. You're right. She stepped closer. I am looking at you like a monster, because what you did to Isabelle is monstrous. Oliver at least had his mother. He had a home, love, attention. Isabelle has nothing except monthly blood money and lies about dead parents. What was I supposed to do? Be a father? The words ripped out of her. Be a man who takes responsibility for his choices instead of hiding from them. The silence that followed was brutal. Cedric sank back into his chair, his face in his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I didn't know how. That's not good enough. I know. He looked up at her and his eyes were red-rimmed. I know it's not good enough, but it's the truth. I was a kid myself when she was born, and I panicked, and I made the wrong choice. And then years passed, and I didn't know how to undo it without making everything worse. So you just kept lying? Yes. Evelyn felt exhausted down to her bones. How many more, Cedric? How many other children are hidden away in orphanages or hunting lodges or God knows where else? None. His voice was firm. Just Oliver and Isabelle. I swear, your word doesn't mean much to me right now. I know, but it's still the truth. She turned toward the door, then stopped. That little girl deserves better than this. She deserves a family, a real one. Evelyn, we can't just... I'm bringing her here, she said flatly. To the palace. She's going to grow up with her brothers where she belongs. The court will crucify us. Let them try. She looked back at him. I faced them before. I'll do it again, but I will not let another child pay for your mistakes. It'll destroy everything we've built. Then we'll build something better from the ruins. Again, she paused. And Cedric, this is the last time. If there's anything else, anything at all, you have exactly one chance to tell me now. He met her eyes. There's nothing else. She searched his face for the truth. Found something that might have been honesty, or might have been desperation, or might have been both. Fine, she said. But if I find out you're lying again, I'm taking all 3 children and you'll never see any of us again. Do you understand? Yes. Good. She left him sitting in the ruins of his own making for the second time in 3 years. The next morning, Evelyn sent a carriage to the orphanage with Margaret and explicit instructions. Bring Isabelle back safely, tell her only that she's going somewhere better, don't mention the Duke. She spent the day preparing a room near the boys' quarters. Had it furnished simply but comfortably. Nothing too overwhelming for a child who'd lived institutionally for 7 years. When the carriage arrived just before dinner, Evelyn was waiting in the main hall. Isabelle descended carefully, clutching a small bag that presumably contained everything she owned. She was tiny for 7, underfed despite the monthly payments. Her eyes were huge in her pale face as she took in the palace, the marble floors, the tapestries, the sheer, overwhelming scale of wealth. Hello, Isabelle, Evelyn said gently. I'm Evelyn. Welcome home. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly. Sister Agnes said I was going somewhere better. She didn't say where. You're at Ashbourne Palace. This is where you're going to live now. Why? Because you belong here. Because... Evelyn crouched down to eye level. Because you're part of this family. and you should have been here from the beginning. Isabelle studied her with disconcerting intelligence. Who are you? I'm the Duchess. But you can call me Evelyn if you'd like. A small pause. Why am I really here? Smart kid. Too smart. Evelyn made a split-second decision to be honest. Because your father lives here. And he should have brought you home a long time ago. My father's dead. That's what they told me. They lied. Adults do that sometimes when they're scared. But I'm done lying. Your father is Duke Cedric Ashbourne. And you have two brothers upstairs who don't know you exist yet, but are going to be very excited to meet you. Isabelle's face cycled through several emotions. Confusion, anger, something that might have been hope buried under layers of self-protection. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, does he want me here? The question broke Evelyn's heart. That's complicated, she said carefully. But I want you here, and I promise you, no one is going to hurt you or send you away again. You're staying. Isabelle nodded slowly, then quietly. Okay. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Bon? Introducing Isabelle to the boys went better than expected, which was to say, it was chaotic and overwhelming, and only minorly traumatic. Lucian took one look at her and announced, "You're small," then immediately tried to share his dinner, which was sweet, until it became clear he was mostly interested in whether she'd eat the vegetables he'd been hiding under his napkin. Oliver was quieter, more watchful. He studied Isabelle with the careful attention of someone who understood what it meant to be an outsider. Finally he said, "I'm Oliver. I lived away from here too before. It gets better." Something in Isabelle's expression softened just slightly. Over the following days, Evelyn watched the three of them navigate each other. Lucian was easy. He treated everyone like a potential playmate until proven otherwise. Oliver was protective, often stepping between Isabelle and anything that seemed threatening. And Isabelle herself was guarded but curious, like someone slowly testing the structural integrity of something they didn't quite trust yet. Cedric kept his distance. Not out of cruelty, Evelyn thought, but shame. He watched Isabelle from across rooms, his expression agonized but never approached. After 3 days of this, Evelyn cornered him in the library. "You need to talk to her." "I don't know what to say." Start with, "I'm sorry." Move on to, "I should have been there." End with, "I'm not going anywhere again." She crossed her arms. "It's not complicated, Cedric. You just have to be honest for once in your life. What if she hates me? Then you'll have earned it. But at least she'll know you tried." He flinched like she'd hit him. That night, Evelyn watched through the cracked nursery door as Cedric sat beside Isabelle's bed. The girl was pretending to sleep, her breathing just a fraction too controlled to be genuine. "Isabelle," Cedric said quietly, "I know you're awake." A long pause. Then the girl's eyes opened. "I'm sorry," Cedric continued. His voice was rough. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I didn't bring you here sooner. Sorry I let you think you were alone." Isabelle stared at him. "Why did you leave me there?" "Because I was scared. It's not a good reason. It's not even a real reason. But it's the truth." "Scared of what?" "Of people who would have hurt you to hurt me. Of not knowing how to be a father. Of failing you worse than I already had." He paused. "I told myself I was keeping you safe. But really, I was just keeping myself safe from having to face what I'd done." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Do you want me here now?" "Yes. God, yes." His own voice cracked. "You're my daughter. You should have been here from the day you were born. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for every day I wasn't there." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out." He hesitated. "If you'll let me." Isabelle was quiet for so long Evelyn thought she might not answer. Then, barely above a whisper, "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was permission. And sometimes that's all broken things need to start healing. But on that gate. The announcement came 2 weeks later. Duke Cedric Ashbourne stood before the court for the second time in 3 years to acknowledge a child he'd hidden from the world. Beside him stood Evelyn, and beside her stood all 3 children, Oliver, Lucian, and now Isabelle. The court's reaction was predictable. Outrage, scandal, several nobles openly calling for Cedric's removal from his title. But Evelyn had learned something important over the past years. Power wasn't about being perfect. It was about controlling the narrative. She stepped forward before the chaos could escalate. "My husband has made mistakes," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. Terrible mistakes that hurt innocent people. But today, we're not here to hide from those mistakes. We're here to correct them. She placed one hand on Isabelle's shoulder. This is Isabelle Ashbourne. She is 7 years old. She has spent her entire life in an orphanage because her father was too afraid to claim her. But that ends today. She took a breath. Some of you will use this to attack us. That's your right. But let me be very clear. Anyone who attempts to harm this child or either of her brothers will answer to me personally. And I promise you, I will be far more ruthless than my husband ever was in protecting this family. The room went silent. We are not asking for your approval, Evelyn continued. We are not asking for your forgiveness. We are simply telling you how things are going to be from now on. These children exist. They're Ashbournes. And if that makes us vulnerable in your eyes, so be it. We'll survive your judgment the same way we've survived everything else. She looked at Cedric, then back at the assembled nobles. This court has spent centuries pretending its problems don't exist, hiding scandals, sacrificing innocence to maintain appearances. Well, we're done playing that game. Our family's sins are public now, all of them. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives teaching our children to be better than we were. The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, someone began to clap. A minor lord Evelyn barely knew. Then another. Not many, maybe a dozen people in a room of over 100. But enough. Enough to signal that the tide had shifted. The Ashbourne family had just rewritten the rules. Again. That night, all 3 children slept in the same room. Their choice, not Evelyn's. She found them curled together like puppies, Oliver's arm slung protectively over both younger children, Lucian snoring softly, Isabelle's hand clutching the edge of Oliver's shirt like an anchor. Cedric stood beside her in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you." "I know. But thank you anyway." They stood in silence for a while, watching the children breathe. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" Cedric asked. "Eventually." Evelyn glanced at him. "But you're going to have to earn it every single day for the rest of your life, I know." "And Cedric?" She waited until he looked at her. "This is it. There are no more chances, no more secrets. If there's anything else—" "There isn't," he said firmly. "I swear on everything I have, there's nothing else." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But that night, after Cedric had fallen asleep and the palace had gone quiet, she lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about patterns. One secret child in a hunting lodge. Another in an orphanage. Both explained. Both resolved. So why did something still feel wrong? She thought about the letter, about the wax seals she hadn't recognized, about the careful, elegant handwriting that belonged to someone educated enough to know exactly how to plant doubt. The boy is not the only secret he's keeping. They'd found Isabelle, confronted that truth, brought her home. But the letter writer had said the boy, singular, not children plural, which meant either they didn't know about Isabelle or they were talking about something else entirely, something still hidden. Evelyn rolled onto her side, watching Cedric's chest rise and fall in the darkness. His face looked peaceful in sleep, all the guilt and exhaustion temporarily erased. She loved him. That was the worst part. After everything, all the lies, all the pain, she still loved the man who'd looked at her with desperate honesty and promised he was done hiding. But love wasn't enough anymore. Love didn't protect children from secrets that could destroy them. Love didn't build foundations strong enough to survive the next revelation. Only truth did that. And she was starting to suspect they still hadn't found it all. The next morning, she sent a message to Thomas. "Find out who sent that letter. I don't care what it takes." Because if there was one thing Evelyn had learned over the past 3 years, it was this. Secrets always found their way into the light eventually. Better to control how they emerged than to wait for them to detonate. And somewhere in the palace, sealed in wax and hidden in shadows, another truth waited to be found. Thomas found the source of the letter in 3 days. Not through traditional channels, no interrogations, no threats, no bribing servants for gossip. Instead, he traced the wax seal. It came from a specific supplier in the merchant district who only sold to nobility. From there, it was a matter of checking recent purchases against handwriting samples Thomas had collected over 40 years of managing correspondence for people who thought their secrets died when the ink dried. The name, when he brought it to Evelyn, made her blood run cold. Lady Margot Ashbourne, Cedric's aunt, the woman who'd raised him after his father died. Evelyn sat in Thomas's cramped office, staring at the evidence spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle she'd been assembling in the wrong order this entire time. "Are you certain?" Thomas nodded grimly. "The handwriting matches letters she sent the Duke years ago, and I confirmed the seal purchase with the merchant. Lady Margot bought 6 sheets of that particular wax 2 weeks before you received the letter. Why would she send it? What does she gain from exposing Cedric's secrets?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, his arthritic fingers drumming against the desk. "Perhaps exposure isn't the goal. Perhaps control is." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Explain." Lady Margot has always been protective of the Ashbourne name. When the situation with Celine emerged, she was the one who orchestrated the hiding. When Isabelle's mother died, she arranged the orphanage payments through intermediaries. She spent decades managing the Duke's mistakes from the shadows. So why reveal them now? Because you disrupted her system. Thomas met her eyes. You brought Oliver into the palace. You stood before the court and turned scandal into strength. You made the Duke's secrets public in a way that stripped her of control over them. And now, he gestured at the letter, she's reminding you there are still things she knows that you don't. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. What things? That's what we need to find out. Lady Margot Ashbourne lived in the east wing of the palace, in quarters that had belonged to her since she'd first arrived as a young bride 50 years ago. She was 73 now, her hair silver, her spine still straight despite age, her eyes sharp enough to cut. Evelyn found her in the morning room, embroidering by the window, the same 3-strand chain stitch that had adorned the dress sent to her chambers 3 years ago. Of course. The connection settled into place with sickening clarity. Margot had taught Celine that technique, had probably taught half the noblewomen at court before arthritis made the detailed work impossible. "Good morning," Evelyn said pleasantly, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Margot didn't look up from her embroidery. "About what, dear?" "About the letter you sent me." That made her pause. The needle stilled. Then, carefully, she set the frame aside and folded her hands in her lap. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "Don't." Evelyn crossed the room and placed the original letter on the table between them. "I know it came from you. The wax seal. The handwriting." Thomas confirmed everything. Margot glanced at the letter, then back at Evelyn. Her expression remained placid. Thomas has been with this family too long. He sees conspiracies everywhere. This isn't a conspiracy. This is you trying to manipulate me by implying Cedric is still hiding something. So I'll ask you directly. Is he? The older woman smiled. It wasn't warm. "My dear girl, after everything you've discovered, you still ask that question. You still believe you've found all the secrets. Answer me." Margot stood slowly, moving to the window. She was smaller than Evelyn remembered, age having compressed her frame. But there was nothing diminished about the way she carried herself, the posture of someone who'd learned. Early that power wasn't about size, but about knowing exactly where everyone's vulnerabilities lived. When Cedric was 16, Margot said quietly, "His father was murdered." Evelyn blinked. "I was told he died of a fever." "That's what everyone was told." Margot turned from the window. "The truth is messier. The late Duke had enemies, powerful ones who felt he'd grown too influential. One night, he was poisoned at a state dinner, dead within hours. Why lie about it? Because acknowledging murder meant acknowledging weakness, meant admitting our family had enemies capable of killing a duke in his own palace. So we called it fever, we buried him quickly, and we made sure no one asked questions. What does this have to do with Cedric's secrets? Everything." Margot moved closer. Cedric saw his father die, watched him convulse and bleed from the eyes while physicians scrambled to save him. He was 16 years old, and he learned in one night that power makes you a target. That the people around you will smile while planning your destruction. That survival means controlling information before it controls you. "He learned it from you," Evelyn said flatly. "I taught him what he needed to know. How to hide things that could be used against him. How to maintain appearances while protecting what mattered." She paused. "I'm the one who arranged for Celine's disappearance, who set up the orphanage for Isabelle, who made sure both children stayed alive when powerful people wanted them dead. Then why expose them now? Why send me that letter?" Margot's smile turned cold. "Because you're making him soft. You've convinced him that honesty is strength, that vulnerability is courage. You've turned him into someone who stands before the court and admits his mistakes like some penitent fool. He's being a father. He's being weak. The words cracked through the room like a whip, and weakness gets people killed in this world. You've forgotten that because you grew up in a minor house where the stakes were manageable. But Cedric is a duke. He has real enemies, people who would love nothing more than to watch him fall. So you sent the letter to remind me he's still hiding things, to make me doubt him. I sent the letter to remind you that truth has a cost. Margot stepped closer. You think you've built something honest? Something pure? You've built a target. Every secret you expose is ammunition for people who want to destroy this family. Then tell me what he's still hiding, Evelyn said coldly. If you're so concerned about protecting him, tell me what I don't know. Margot regarded her for a long moment. Then she walked to a cabinet and removed a small wooden box. She placed it on the table between them. Inside, Evelyn found documents, birth records, death certificates, financial transactions dating back 15 years, and photographs. Her hand shook as she lifted them. 4 children, all around the same age as Oliver and Isabelle. Different mothers, all bearing Cedric's unmistakable features, the gray eyes, the sharp jaw, the dark hair. How many? Evelyn's voice came out strangled. 6, Margot said calmly, including Oliver and Isabelle. The other 4 didn't survive infancy. Different circumstances, all tragic. But the mothers were compensated, the situations handled quietly, and Cedric was protected from scandal. 6 children. Evelyn couldn't breathe. 6. He was young, reckless. I taught him better eventually, but the damage was done. So I cleaned up the messes, made sure the surviving children were cared for, made sure no one could use them against him. Does he know? About the ones who died? He knows. Margot's voice was matter of fact. He visited each grave once. Then I made him stop because grief is a luxury dukes can't afford. You're a monster. I'm a survivor. And I made sure he survived too. You should be thanking me. Evelyn looked at the photographs again. 4 tiny faces that had existed briefly before being erased. 4 mothers who'd been paid off and sent away. 4 lives that had been deemed acceptable collateral damage in the preservation of Ashbourne power. And Cedric had known, had visited their graves, had carried this weight and never told her. Where are the mothers? She asked quietly. Scattered. 3 remarried. 1 died of consumption 2 years ago. All signed agreements never to speak of it. She paused. They were well compensated. You bought their silence. I bought their survival. Do you know what happens to women who try to claim a duke's bastard? They disappear, permanently. I gave them money and lives. That's more mercy than most would have shown. Evelyn's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the photographs. Get out. This is my home, dear. Get out or I will have you removed bodily. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what you've done for this family. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. Margot collected this box calmly. You'll understand eventually. When someone comes for Oliver or Isabelle or Lucian, when you realize that every truth you've exposed has made them vulnerable. She moved toward the door. I've spent 50 years keeping this family alive. You've spent 3 years dismantling every protection I built. We'll see which approach works better when the wolves arrive. Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with the weight of 4 dead children and a husband who'd lied about literally everything that mattered. She didn't go to Cedric immediately. Instead, she went to the nursery where all 3 children were having lessons with their tutors. She stood in the doorway watching them, Oliver helping Isabelle with her letters, Lucian making faces behind the tutor's back, all of them alive and real and unaware that their father's past was littered with siblings who'd never gotten the chance to cause trouble. How do you tell children that? How do you explain that they were the lucky ones? Your Grace. She turned to find Miss Caroline, the governess, watching her with concern. Are you well? No, Evelyn said honestly. But I will be. She forced a smile. Keep them occupied today. I have something I need to handle. She found Cedric in the stables, checking on one of the horses that had thrown a shoe. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw on her face made him go pale. Evelyn? 6 children. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Cedric straightened slowly, the color draining from his face. How did you... Your aunt. She showed me everything, the photographs, the death certificates. 4 children who didn't survive long enough for you to hide them in orphanages. He opened his mouth, closed it. There was nowhere to run this time, no explanation that would make this better. You told me, Evelyn continued, her voice shaking, that there was nothing else. You swore on everything you had that Oliver and Isabelle were the only secrets. You looked me in the eyes, and you lied. They're dead, Evelyn. They've been dead for years. There was no point in— No point? Her voice rose. There was no point in telling your wife that you'd fathered 6 children before you were 30? That 4 of them died and you just— What? Moved on? Pretended they never existed? What was I supposed to say? That I was a reckless kid who got women pregnant and couldn't protect them? That I failed over and over before I finally learned how to hide things properly? Yes. She stepped closer. Yes, that's exactly what you were supposed to say. Because that's the truth, Cedric. That's who you actually are. Not some tragic duke making impossible choices, but a man who created life after life and then paid people to make the consequences disappear. I was trying to survive. No. She shook her head. You were trying to avoid responsibility. And the worst part? You're still doing it. Even now, after everything we've been through, you're standing here trying to justify why lying to me was somehow the right choice. Because the truth would have destroyed us. The truth is destroying us anyway. Her voice cracked. Every time I think we've reached the bottom, there's another secret, another child, another lie you convinced yourself was necessary. When does it end, Cedric? How many more revelations before there's nothing left to salvage? This is it. His eyes were desperate. I swear to you, this is everything. You said that about Oliver. You said it about Isabelle. Why should I believe you now? Because I'm begging you to. He moved toward her, hands outstretched. Please, Evelyn. I know I've broken your trust. I know I don't deserve another chance. But those children, Oliver, Isabelle, Lucian, they need both of us. Don't let my mistakes destroy them. She stepped back before he could touch her. Your mistakes are already destroying them. They're growing up in a house built on lies. Learning from a father who thinks honesty is optional. What kind of men and women do you think they'll become if this is what we teach them? Then help me be better. Help me show them something different. I've been trying to help you for 3 years, and every time I do, I find out there's something worse hiding underneath. Her hands were shaking. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep holding this family together while you're actively working to tear it apart. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know if we survive this one. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cedric's face crumpled. Please, don't take them away from me. I'm not taking them anywhere, Evelyn said quietly. But I need time. Time to figure out if I can live with what you've done. If I can raise children with a man I don't trust anymore. How much time? I don't know. She turned toward the door. But until I figure it out, you sleep somewhere else. You see the children during designated hours, and you stay away from me. Evelyn, go, Cedric, before I say something we can't come back from. She left him standing in the stables, surrounded by horses and hay and the wreckage of every promise he'd ever made. The next week was brutal. Evelyn maintained appearances during the day, attending court functions, managing household affairs, spending time with the children. But at night, alone in chambers that felt too large without Cedric's presence, she sat with the photographs Margot had given her and tried to make sense of the math. 6 children by the time he was 30. 4 dead. 2 survivors who'd been hidden away like shameful secrets. And then he'd met her, married her, built a life that looked honest while standing on a foundation of corpses and lies. The worst part was that she still loved him. Even knowing everything, the recklessness, the selfishness, the complete disregard for the women he'd left behind, some stubborn part of her heart refused to let go. But love wasn't enough. Love had never been enough. Not when children were involved, not when the stakes were this high. She needed advice, real advice, from someone who understood the impossible position she was in. So she went to Celine. Checked. The hunting lodge looked different in autumn. The trees had gone gold and red, leaves carpeting the ground in layers that crunched underfoot. Smoke rose from the chimney in lazy spirals. Celine answered the door herself. Her expression shifted when she saw Evelyn, surprise giving way to concern. Your Grace, what are you doing here? Can we talk? Celine stepped aside, ushering her into the main room where a fire crackled in the hearth. They sat across from each other, the space between them heavy with the weight of shared history. I found out about the others, Evelyn said without preamble. The children who didn't survive. The mothers who were paid off. Celine's face remained carefully neutral. I wondered when you would. You knew? I knew there were rumors. Women who'd disappeared from court suddenly. Babies who'd been born and then weren't talked about anymore. She paused. I didn't know specifics. Margot made sure of that. She told me there were 6 total, 4 dead. Oliver and Isabelle the only survivors. That sounds about right. Celine's voice was flat. Cedric was different when we met. Older. More careful. But the damage was already done. How did you live with it? Knowing what he'd done? Celine looked at her for a long moment. Honestly, I didn't have the luxury of moral outrage. I was a woman who'd gotten pregnant by a duke. My choices were limited to accepting his help or ending up like the others. Disappeared, discredited, possibly dead. So I took what he offered, and I survived. But you must have been angry. Angry doesn't feed a child. Angry doesn't keep you safe when powerful people want you gone. She leaned forward. I wasn't with Cedric because I loved him. I was with him because he was the least terrible option available. And when he hid us away, I accepted it because being hidden was better than being dead. Eveline felt something crack inside her chest. How do you live with that level of pragmatism? You do what you have to do to protect what matters. Celine's eyes were hard. You're lucky, Evelyn. You have choices. You can leave. You can take the children and disappear. You have family, resources, options. Most women don't. So I should stay? Just accept that my husband fathered 6 children and let 4 of them die? I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this. Leaving won't make you feel better. It'll just make you alone with your anger instead of trying to build something from the pieces. What if there are no pieces left to build with? Celine shrugged. Then you build something new. But you don't run. Running is what people without power do. You have power. Use it. Tweak. The conversation stayed with her on the long walk back to the palace. By the time she arrived, night had fallen and the children were already asleep. She stood in the corridor outside their rooms, listening to their breathing through the cracked doors. 3 children who'd survived, who'd been claimed and protected and given a chance, and 4 who hadn't. The unfairness of it made her want to scream. But screaming wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring back the ones who'd died, wouldn't erase Cedric's mistakes. All it would do was wake the children. She returned to her chambers to find Margot waiting. The older woman sat in the chair by the fire, embroidery in her lap, looking for all the world like she had every right to be there. Get out, Eveline said flatly. I don't think so. Margot set aside her needlework. We're not finished yet. There's nothing left to say. On the contrary, there's quite a bit. Margot stood slowly. You went to Celine, asked her how to live with what Cedric did. Did she tell you? Did she explain how survival works in a world that eats women alive? She told me to use my power. Good. Then perhaps you're finally learning. Margot moved closer. You've been playing at being Duchess, Evelyn, standing before the court and making speeches about honesty and truth. But truth is a weapon, not a virtue. And if you don't learn to wield it properly, someone else will use it to destroy you. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've made enemies. Real ones. People who've been waiting for the Ashbourne family to stumble so they can tear us apart. Every secret you've exposed has given them ammunition. Then maybe Cedric shouldn't have created so many secrets. Probably not. But he did. And now you have a choice. You can keep pretending honesty will save you, or you can accept that sometimes survival means getting your hands dirty. Eveline's jaw tightened. I'm not becoming like you. Margot smiled. You already are, dear. You just haven't admitted it yet. When you stood before that court and turned scandal into strength, that was manipulation. When you brought Isabelle to the palace knowing it would force Cedric to acknowledge her, that was control. You're not some naive girl anymore. You're a duchess who's learned how to weaponize truth. The words landed like a punch because they weren't entirely wrong. What do you want from me? Eveline asked quietly. I want you to stop weakening my nephew. Stop making him believe that vulnerability is strength. Because the moment our enemies see weakness, they'll strike. And all 3 of those children will pay the price. I'm protecting those children. By what? Destroying their father? By teaching them that honesty is more important than survival? Margot's voice hardened. You're building a house of cards, Eveline, And when it falls, it'll crush everyone underneath. Get out. This is my home. Get out or I will have the guards remove you. Eveline stepped forward. You've spent 50 years manipulating this family, hiding things, controlling information, making decisions about who deserves to live and who deserves to disappear. Well, I'm done letting you pull the strings. As of right now, you have no authority in this house, no access to family decisions, no contact with the children unless I explicitly approve it. Margot's expression went cold. You're making a mistake, probably, but it's my mistake to make. Now leave. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Margot collected her embroidery and walked to the door. She paused on the threshold. When this all falls apart, don't come crying to me. I won't need to, Eveline said, because unlike you, I don't build my power on corpses and lies. The door closed with a soft click. Eveline stood in the empty room, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd just banished the woman who'd held the Ashbourne family together for half a century, made an enemy of someone who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried. But she'd also drawn a line, said enough, claimed authority over her own life and the lives of those children. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. But the fallout came swiftly. Within 2 days, rumors began circulating through court, whispers that the Duchess had gone mad with power, that she'd driven the Duke from his own chambers, that she was planning to seize control of the estate and push Cedric out entirely. None of it was true, but truth had never been a requirement for court gossip. Eveline weathered it the way she'd learned to weather everything, with her spine straight and her face calm and the absolute certainty that showing fear was the same as admitting defeat. But on the third night, Thomas came to her chambers with news that changed everything. Your Grace, he said quietly, there's been a development. What kind of development? Lady Margot has called a family council. She's invoking her right as senior family member to review the Duke's fitness to maintain his title. Eveline's blood went cold. She can do that? Technically, yes. If she can convince enough family members that the Duke has become unstable or incompetent, they can petition the Crown to review his position. On what grounds? On the grounds that he's allowed his wife to manipulate him into making decisions that damage the family's reputation, that his judgment has been compromised, that he's unfit to continue as Duke. This is about me. This is about power. Thomas met her eyes. Margot spent 50 years building influence. You've spent 3 years dismantling it. She was always going to strike back eventually. When is this council meeting? Tomorrow night, all senior family members have been summoned, including the Duke. And me? You're not technically family by blood, so... Thomas hesitated. You won't be allowed to attend. Of course not. Eveline's laugh was bitter. They're going to decide my husband's fate, and I don't even get a voice. Not officially, but... He pulled out a folded piece of paper. There might be another way. The plan was risky, potentially disastrous, but it was the only option that gave her any control over what happened next. She spent the next 24 hours preparing, gathering documents, rehearsing what she would say, making sure every detail was perfect because she'd only get one chance at this. When the family council convened in the Great Hall the following evening, she wasn't in the room, but she'd made arrangements. Cedric sat at the head of the table, looking exhausted and defeated. Around him gathered every senior Ashbourne, cousins, uncles, distant relations who'd crawled out of various estates specifically for this meeting. And at the opposite end of the table sat Margot, her expression serene and confident. She began with a speech about tradition, about the importance of maintaining the family's reputation, about how Cedric's recent decisions, acknowledging bastards, making private matters public, allowing his wife to influence his judgment, had weakened their position at court. The other family members listened. Some nodded. A few looked uncomfortable but didn't object. And then Margot played her trump card. She produced documents showing every scandal Cedric had created over the past 15 years. Every hidden child, every paid-off mother, every secret that had required management. This is who we've allowed to lead us, she said quietly. A man who cannot control his own appetites, who creates problems and expects others to clean them up, who has now been manipulated by his wife into believing honesty is more important than survival. Several people shifted uncomfortably. The evidence was damning. Even Cedric couldn't argue with it. I move, Margot continued. That we petition the Crown to remove Duke Cedric from his position on grounds of incompetence and install a regent until young Lucian comes of age. The room went silent. Then the doors burst open. Eveline entered, flanked by 2 guards and carrying a leather portfolio. Every head turned toward her. "This is a closed family council," Margot said coldly. "You have no right." "I have every right," Eveline's voice carried through the room. "As Duchess Ashbourne, as mother to the heir, and as the person who's been holding this family together while you lot sat in your estates pretending the world wasn't changing." She walked to the center of the room and slammed the portfolio onto the table. "You want to talk about fitness to lead? Fine. Let's talk about it." She opened the portfolio, revealing documents of her own. "This is a complete accounting of every decision made by this family over the past 50 years. Every secret hidden, every problem buried, every life destroyed to protect our reputation." She pulled out photographs, the ones Margot had shown her, plus others she'd found in the family archives. 23 children, she said clearly. Not 6. 23. Fathered by various Ashbourne men over 3 generations. Some acknowledged, most hidden, several dead. This isn't a Cedric problem. This is a family problem. And every single person in this room has benefited from the system that created it. The assembled family members went pale. "So yes," Eveline continued, "Cedric made mistakes. Terrible ones. But he's also the first person in this family in 3 generations who's tried to actually fix them instead of just burying them deeper." She turned to Margot. "You want to remove him for incompetence? Fine. But let's be honest about what you're really doing. You're punishing him for refusing to keep playing the game your way." Margot's expression had gone hard as stone. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." Eveline pulled out one more document. "This is a petition to the Crown. Signed by me, by Cedric, and by every servant in this palace who spent the last 3 years watching us try to build something better. We're requesting a formal review of family leadership structures. We're asking the Crown to recognize that maybe, just maybe, the old ways of doing things have failed. You can't. I can. And I am." She looked around the room. "You want to remove Cedric? Go ahead. Petition the Crown. But know that when you do, this petition goes with it. Every secret in this portfolio becomes public record. Every skeleton in every closet gets examined, and we all live with the consequences together." The silence was absolute. Finally, one of the uncles, a man Eveline barely knew, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until cooler heads can prevail." "Seconded," said another. Margot's jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "Yes," Eveline said quietly. "It is." She looked at Cedric, then back at Margot. "The old way of running this family ends tonight. Either we move forward together, honestly, transparently, accepting that we're going to make mistakes, or we tear ourselves apart. Your choice." She picked up the portfolio and walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who just realized the balance of power had permanently shifted. Later that night, Cedric found her in the library. She was sitting by the window, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "That was quite a performance," he said quietly. "It wasn't a performance. It was survival." He sat down across from her. "Margot is going to come after you for this. Let her try. I'm done being afraid of women who wield power through fear." They sat in silence for a moment. "Thank you," Cedric said finally, "for defending me." "I wasn't defending you," Eveline said. I was defending our children. There's a difference. Is there?" She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. He looked older, broken, like someone who'd finally run out of places to hide. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly, "for the lies, for the children who died, for making me complicit in a system I didn't even know existed. I know, but I also know that leaving would hurt Oliver and Isabelle and Lucian more than it would hurt you. So I'm staying. Not for you. For them. That's fair. But things change, Cedric, starting now. No more secrets. No more hiding. If something happens, anything, you tell me immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes. And you're going to therapy. I don't care if dukes don't do that. You're going to find someone who can help you process whatever made you think creating children and abandoning them was acceptable behavior." "All right. And you're going to spend every single day for the rest of your life proving to those 3 children that they matter, that they're not mistakes to be managed. That family means something beyond damage control. I will. His voice cracked. I promise. Your promises don't mean much to me anymore, but your actions might eventually. She stood, preparing to leave. Cedric's voice stopped her at the door. Evelyn? What? I really am sorry. For all of it. She looked back at him. I know. But sorry doesn't fix anything. Only time and consistent action do that. So stop apologizing and start being better. Then she left him alone in the library with the weight of every choice he'd ever made. And somewhere in the palace, 3 children slept, unaware that their entire world had just been rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of lies. Unaware that their mother had just become the most dangerous woman at court. Unaware that everything was about to change in ways no one could predict. Because here's what Evelyn understood now, what she'd learned through 3 years of digging up secrets and confronting truths that should have stayed buried. Power wasn't about bloodlines or titles or the ability to hide your mistakes. Power was about deciding which truths to reveal and when. About controlling the narrative before it controlled you. About being willing to burn everything down if that's what survival required. And if that made her more like Margot than she wanted to admit, well, sometimes you had to become the thing you hated to protect what you loved, even if it cost you everything you'd ever believed about yourself. The attack came 3 days after the family council collapsed. Not a physical attack. That would have been too obvious, too crude for the kind of people they were dealing with. Instead, it came through the crown itself. A formal letter delivered at dawn, sealed with the royal insignia, requesting Duke Cedric Ashbourne's presence at court to address concerns about his leadership and fitness to maintain his title. Evelyn read the letter twice, her hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This was it. The move she'd been expecting since the moment she'd walked out of that council meeting with every family secret exposed. Margot had gone over their heads, straight to the people who could actually destroy them. Cedric stood by the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. When does the crown want me? Tomorrow, noon. That's fast. That's intentional. She set the letter down. They want you off balance, scrambling, making mistakes. I don't have a defense, Evelyn. Everything Margot told them is true. Truth is just a starting point. What matters is how you frame it. She moved to stand beside him. You made mistakes. 23 children across 3 generations. That's a legacy of dysfunction. Not a personal failing, but you're also the first Ashbourne in living memory who's tried to fix it instead of hide it. The crown doesn't care about my redemption arc. No, but they care about stability. And right now, removing you creates more chaos than keeping you does. She paused. We just have to make sure they understand that. How? By showing them what happens when the alternative takes power. She looked at him. Margot wants control? Fine. Let's show the crown exactly what her version of leadership looks like. All the disappeared women, all the dead children, all the buried scandals that kept the Ashbourne name clean, while bodies piled up in unmarked graves. That'll destroy the entire family. Yes. Her voice was cold. It will. But if we're going down, we're taking everyone with us. No more protecting people who don't deserve protection. Cedric turned to look at her, and something in his expression shifted. You've changed. I've learned. There's a difference. What have you learned? That mercy is a luxury we can't afford. That survival means being willing to burn everything down if that's what it takes to protect what matters. She met his eyes. Your aunt taught me that. Ironic, isn't it? They spent the day preparing, gathering documents, organizing evidence, building a case that was equal parts defense and mutually assured destruction. Thomas worked tirelessly, pulling records from archives that hadn't been touched in decades. Birth certificates, death records, financial transactions showing decades of hush money paid to women who'd been disappeared or silenced. This is enough to bring down half the nobility, he said quietly, stacking papers on Cedric's desk. Good, Evelyn replied. Then they'll think twice before trying to bring down us. By evening, they had everything organized. 3 leather portfolios, each containing enough scandal to destroy multiple families. Insurance, Evelyn called it, the kind you hoped you'd never have to use but kept loaded and ready just in case. She was reviewing the contents for the 3rd time when a servant knocked on the study door. Your Grace, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Who? The servant hesitated. Lady Margot, Your Grace. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She looked at Cedric. He gave a slight nod. Send her in. Margot entered like she owned the place, which, Evelyn supposed, she probably felt she did after 50 years of running things from the shadows. She looked smaller, somehow, age and anger having carved her down to something sharp and brittle. You called the crown, Evelyn said without preamble. I did. Margot didn't bother denying it. You left me no choice. We always have choices. Not when someone threatens to destroy everything you've spent your life building. Margot moved closer. You think you've won because you exposed our secrets? You've just made us all targets. We were already targets. The only difference is now we're not pretending otherwise. Margot's expression hardened. I came here to offer you one last chance. Withdraw the petition. Convince Cedric to step down voluntarily in favor of a regency. I'll make sure the Crown's investigation goes away quietly. And in exchange, your children stay safe. Because if this goes to court tomorrow, if you expose everything in those portfolios, people will die. Maybe not immediately, maybe not obviously, but the families you're threatening will retaliate. And they won't go after you or Cedric. They'll go after Oliver and Isabelle and Lucian. Evelyn's blood went cold. You're threatening my children. I'm warning you about the consequences of your actions. There's a difference. Get out. Margot didn't move. You're making a mistake. You think you're protecting them by being honest? You're painting targets on their backs. Every secret you expose makes them more vulnerable. Then we'll make ourselves dangerous enough that people are too afraid to attack. That's not how power works, child. Power isn't about being feared, it's about being invisible. About controlling things from the shadows where no one sees you coming. No. Evelyn stepped forward. That's how you wielded power. But I'm not you. And I'm done letting fear dictate our choices. Then you're a fool, and your children will pay for it. I said get out. The two women stared at each other. Evelyn could feel Cedric's tension behind her, Thomas's quiet presence near the desk. This was the moment. The point where everything either escalated or de-escalated, and she knew with absolute certainty that backing down now meant losing everything. Margot must have seen it too, because her expression shifted to something almost like resignation. So be it, she said quietly. When they come for your family, and they will come, remember I gave you a way out. She left without another word. The door closed. Evelyn's hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the desk to steady herself. She's right, Cedric said quietly, about the retaliation. The families we're threatening won't just accept exposure. They'll come after us. I know. Then why are we doing this? Because the alternative is living in fear forever. Because our children deserve better than growing up under the same system that created 23 abandoned kids and 4 dead babies. She turned to face him. Because if we don't break this cycle now, Lucian will grow up to be exactly like you were at 25. And I will not let that happen, even if it costs us everything, especially if it costs us everything. They left for the Crown's court at mid-morning. Evelyn wore armor disguised as a dress, dark blue silk that looked elegant, but felt like going to war. Cedric wore his formal duke's attire, every button perfect, every line sharp. They looked like nobility, felt like soldiers heading into battle. The children stayed behind under heavy guard. Evelyn had kissed each of them that morning, memorizing their faces just in case this all went wrong, and she didn't make it back. Just in case the retaliation Margot warned about came faster than expected. Oliver had sensed something was wrong. He'd gripped her hand tightly and asked, "Are you in trouble?" She'd smiled and lied through her teeth. "No, sweetheart, everything's fine." He hadn't believed her. She could see it in his eyes. But he was old enough now to understand when adults needed him to pretend. The throne room was packed. Every major noble family had sent representatives, ostensibly to witness the proceedings, but really to see the Ashbourne family brought low. Margot sat in the front row, her expression serene. The king, old, tired, probably sick of noble drama, sat on his throne looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. "Duke Ashbourne," he said once the room quieted, "you stand accused of conduct unbecoming of your station, of fathering numerous illegitimate children and hiding them to avoid scandal, of allowing your judgment to be compromised. How do you answer these charges?" Cedric stepped forward. His voice was steady. "Guilty," Your Majesty. To all of it. The room erupted in whispers. Margot's expression shifted to something almost triumphant. However, Cedric continued, raising his voice, I'm not the only guilty party in this room. He gestured to Evelyn, who moved forward carrying the first portfolio. She opened it on the table before the throne, spreading documents out like weapons. These records, Cedric said clearly, document similar behavior across multiple noble families spanning 3 generations. 23 illegitimate children in total, abandoned, hidden, or eliminated to protect family reputations. I'm guilty, but so is half this court. The whispers turned to angry muttering. Several nobles stood, shouting denials. The king raised a hand for silence. These are serious allegations. They're documented facts, Your Majesty. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. Birth records, death certificates, financial transactions, all cross-referenced and verified. The system that created my husband's mistakes is the same system that's protected every family in this room from accountability. This is outrageous. One of the nobles, Lord Pemberton, whose family had been mentioned in the documents, stepped forward. You cannot make wild accusations without— Your daughter gave birth to a bastard 8 years ago, Evelyn said flatly. You had the baby placed with a farm family and paid them 200 gold annually to keep quiet. The child's name is Marcus. He's alive and well in the northern provinces. Pemberton went white. That's a lie. It's documented. She pulled out a specific page and held it up. With your signature. The room fell silent. The king looked tired. What exactly are you proposing, Duchess Ashbourne? I'm proposing, Eveline said carefully, that we stop pretending this is about one man's mistakes and start acknowledging this is about a broken system. Duke Ashbourne has done wrong. He's admitted it. He's working to correct it. But punishing him while protecting everyone else accomplishes nothing except making him a convenient scapegoat. So you want immunity for your husband. I want accountability for everyone. She looked around the room. Every family mentioned in these documents should face the same scrutiny. Every hidden child should be acknowledged and provided for. Every woman who was paid off or disappeared should have their story told. That would destroy half the nobility. Perhaps. Her voice was ice. Or perhaps it would force us all to be better. To stop sacrificing innocent people to protect our reputations. The king rubbed his temples. This is a mess. Yes, Your Majesty, but it's a mess we created. And we can either clean it up together or watch it destroy us one family at a time. Margot stood abruptly. Your Majesty, this is clearly a desperate attempt to avoid consequences. The Duchess is threatening exposure to protect her husband. It's extortion. It's transparency, Evelyn shot back. Something this court hasn't seen in generations. And if we refuse? If we remove Duke Ashbourne and ignore these allegations? Evelyn pulled out the second portfolio. Then these documents become public record. Every scandal, every secret, every body buried in every closet, and we all burn together. The threat hung in the air like smoke. The king looked at Cedric. And you support this approach? Cedric met his eyes. I do, Your Majesty. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending. If accountability means losing my title, so be it. But I will not be the only one held responsible for a system we all participated in. The king was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at his advisors, who whispered frantically among themselves. Finally, he spoke. I will take these matters under consideration. Duke Ashbourne, you will maintain your title pending full investigation. But make no mistake, if evidence emerges of crimes beyond simple, moral failing, you will be prosecuted fully. Understood, Your Majesty. And as for these other families, the king's gaze swept the room. You will all cooperate with my investigators. Anyone found to have engaged in the behaviors documented in these portfolios will face appropriate consequences. This is an outrage, Pemberton shouted. You're letting her blackmail the entire court. I'm doing what I should have done decades ago. The king's voice was sharp, holding nobility to the same standards we claim to represent. This court is dismissed. Matel. The walk back to the carriage felt surreal. They'd survived, barely, but the victory felt hollow because Evelyn knew what came next. Retaliation. It started that night. A fire in the stables, small, contained, probably meant as warning rather than actual destruction. But the message was clear: we can reach you. Evelyn increased security, guards on every door, servants vetted and monitored. The children weren't allowed outside without armed escort. 2 days later, one of the kitchen staff was found dead in an alley, officially ruled a robbery. Unofficially, everyone knew better. They're sending a message, Thomas said grimly, showing us what they're capable of. Evelyn stood at the window of her chambers, watching guards patrol the grounds. How many more will die before they're satisfied? As many as it takes to make you back down. Then they don't know me very well. That's what I'm afraid of. She turned to look at him. You think I should have taken Margot's deal? I think you've painted targets on everyone in this household. Thomas's voice was gentle. I think you've declared war on people who've been playing this game for generations. And I think you're gambling that fear will protect you when history suggests otherwise. Then what would you have me do? Survive. Whatever that takes. That night, Cedric found her still awake, staring at papers she wasn't really reading. We could leave, he said quietly. Take the children. Disappear. Start over somewhere they can't find us. And let them win. We'd be alive. We'd be running. There's a difference. She set down the papers. Those children deserve to grow up knowing their parents didn't abandon everything the moment things got difficult. Even if staying gets them killed? The question hit like a punch. Because that was the real fear, wasn't it? Not that she'd die. Not that Cedric would die. But that their stubbornness would cost Oliver or Isabelle or Lucian their lives. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know if I'm being brave or just stupidly stubborn. I don't know if standing our ground is the right choice, or if we're sacrificing our children on the altar of principle. Then why are we doing it? She looked at him, because someone has to. Because if we run, if we hide, we're just perpetuating the same system that created this mess. We're teaching our children that power means never facing consequences, that survival means sacrificing everyone else. That's very noble. His voice was strained. But nobility doesn't stop knives in the dark. No, it doesn't. She moved to stand beside him. But living in fear doesn't stop them either. At least this way we're fighting back. They stood in silence. Two people who'd built something fragile and real from wreckage and lies, now watching it all threaten to collapse again. The third attack came 4 days after the court appearance. This one wasn't subtle. Evelyn was in the garden with the children when she heard shouting from the gates. Guards running. The clash of steel on steel. She grabbed all 3 children and pulled them behind a stone wall, her heart hammering. Stay here, she ordered. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Oliver's eyes were wide with fear. What's happening? Just stay here. She ran toward the house, her dress tangling around her legs. Found Thomas in the main hall, blood on his sleeve, his face grim. Armed men at the gate. Professional. They killed 2 guards before we drove them back. How many? 6. Maybe more. He grabbed her arm. Your Grace, you need to take the children and leave. Now. This isn't a warning anymore. This is an assassination attempt. I'm not running. Then you're a fool. The door burst open. Cedric entered, sword in hand, his shirt torn and bloody. Not his blood. Evelyn could see that immediately. But close enough. They're regrouping, he said shortly. We have maybe 10 minutes before they try again. Evelyn's mind raced. The children. They couldn't stay here. Couldn't be anywhere near this when the next wave came. Thomas, she said quickly. Take the children. There's a safe house in the southern provinces. Address is in my desk. Go, now. Your Grace? That's an order. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. He ran toward the garden. Evelyn turned to Cedric. How many men do we have? 20 guards. Maybe 15 still combat ready. Against professional killers? We're outnumbered. Then we make ourselves more trouble than we're worth. How? By making this so public they can't hide it. She grabbed his arm. We need to get to the town square. Ring the alarm bells. Get witnesses. They can't massacre a duke and duchess in front of hundreds of people. They can if they move fast enough. Then we'd better move faster. They ran through the palace, gathering every guard and servant they could find. The bells started ringing. Emergency alarm. The kind that brought the entire town running. By the time they reached the square, a crowd was forming. Confused people demanding to know what was happening. Evelyn climbed onto the fountain platform, her voice carrying. We are under attack. Armed men, hired killers, are trying to murder Duke Ashbourne and his family because we dared to expose corruption at court. The crowd's confusion turned to anger. People shouted questions. Evelyn kept talking. We have proof. Documents showing decades of scandal covered up by noble families who would rather kill us than face accountability. If we die tonight, those documents become public. Every secret exposed. Behind her, she could hear fighting. The assassins had arrived. But now they were doing it in front of hundreds of witnesses, and their advantage evaporated. Guards poured into the square. Not palace guards, town guards, city watch, people who answered to the king directly. The assassins were surrounded in minutes. One of them tried to fight, died quickly. The others surrendered. Evelyn stood on that fountain, covered in dust and sweat, her dress torn, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Alive. They were alive. Cedric climbed up beside her, blood on his face, exhaustion in every line of his body. But alive. The crowd stared at them. These two people who just survived an assassination attempt by turning it into public theater. Tomorrow, Evelyn said, her voice still carrying, we return to court. We present evidence of who hired these men. And we finish this. The crowd roared approval. But as Evelyn climbed down, accepted Cedric's hand to steady herself, she knew the truth. This wasn't finished. This was just beginning. Because somewhere in the city, Margot was watching, learning, adapting. And the next attack wouldn't be so obvious. They returned to the palace under armed guard. Found Thomas with the children. He'd gotten them as far as the stables before the alarm bells rang, and he'd brought them back. All three were silent, their faces pale. They'd heard everything, seen the guards running, understood that their parents had almost died. Evelyn gathered them close. All three pressed against her, and felt the weight of every choice she'd made, every secret she'd exposed, every threat she'd made. This was the cost, not her life or Cedric's, but these children growing up knowing their family was at war. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Oliver pulled back first. His gray eyes, so much like Cedric's, were hard. Don't be sorry. Be smart. What? He looked at her with the expression of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. They're going to keep coming. Until they get what they want, or you make it too expensive to keep trying. So make it expensive. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom forged in fire. Evelyn looked at her 9-year-old stepson and saw someone who understood violence and survival better than most adults. I will, she promised. That night, she and Cedric sat in his study, reviewing evidence, trying to trace who'd hired the assassins, following money trails that led back to shell companies and anonymous accounts. It was nearly dawn when Thomas knocked. Your Grace, we found something.
What?
He laid out documents showing payments from a trust fund established 50 years ago, controlled by one person, signed by one name, Lady Margot Ashbourne. She hired them, Evelyn said flatly. Her own family. Cedric stared at the papers. His aunt had just tried to have him killed. The betrayal should have hurt, should have registered as something devastating, but Evelyn just felt tired. Of course Margot had escalated. Of course she'd gone from political maneuvering to murder. That was the logical next step when control was slipping. We have her, Cedric said quietly. This is enough to arrest her. Charge her with attempted murder. No. Evelyn stood, pacing. Arresting her makes her a martyr, makes us look weak, like we need the crown's protection. Then what? We end her, completely. Not by killing her, by destroying everything she's built, every connection, every source of power. We dismantle her influence piece by piece until there's nothing left. How? By exposing why she hired those assassins. By showing the court that she's been manipulating things for 50 years. That every scandal, every hidden child, every dead baby, all of it happened under her watch. With her approval. She looked at Cedric. Your aunt is the architect of everything wrong with this family. We prove it, publicly, and we let the court tear her apart. That'll take time. Then we'd better get started. The next morning, they returned to court. Not summoned this time. They requested audience, arrived with 3 wagons full of documents, and proceeded to systematically destroy Lady Margot Ashbourne. Every hidden child traced back to her involvement. Every payoff to mothers authorized by her accounts. Every death prevented or ignored at her direction. 50 years of manipulation laid out in excruciating detail. Margot sat through it all, her expression calm. But Evelyn could see cracks forming, the way her hands gripped the armrests, the tension in her jaw. When Evelyn finally presented evidence of the assassination attempt, payment records, witness testimony from the captured assassins, documentation of Margot's access to the trust fund used to hire them. The room erupted. The king's face went cold. "You ordered an attack on your own family?" Margot finally spoke. Her voice was steady. "I did what was necessary to protect the Ashbourne name from destruction. By murdering the Duke, by removing a weakness before it became fatal." The king leaned forward. "And you believe you had the authority to make that decision?" "I had the responsibility. 50 years of it. Someone had to have the strength to do what needed doing." "That's not strength." Evelyn's voice cut through the room. "That's cowardice, hiding behind necessity, behind protection, behind every excuse people use when they're too afraid to face consequences." Margot turned to her. "You foolish girl. You have no idea what you've unleashed, what will happen now that you've stripped away every protection this family had. Then I guess we'll find out together." The king's judgment was swift. Lady Margot Ashbourne was stripped of all titles, all property, all influence, banished from court permanently. Her assets seized, her connections severed, her power dismantled. She was escorted from the throne room by guards, didn't look back, didn't plead, just walked out with her spine straight and her head high, even in defeat. Evelyn watched her go and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. "Is it over?" Cedric asked quietly. She looked at him. At the throne room full of nobles who'd just witnessed the fall of one of the court's most powerful figures. At the king who'd let it happen because the alternative was exposing his own complicity. "No," she said, "it's not over. It's just beginning, because they'd broken the system, shattered the illusion that nobility protected its own no matter what, proven that even the most powerful could fall if enough truth came to light. And now every family in that room was terrified they might be next." They returned home to find the children safe. Oliver and Isabelle and Lucian, all three waiting in the main hall, their faces anxious. "Is she gone?" Oliver asked. "She's gone." "Good." He crossed his arms. She scared Isabelle. Evelyn looked at the youngest, who was pressed against Oliver's side. Isabelle had been through too much already. Orphanage, sudden displacement, assassination attempt. And now this. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Evelyn said gently. "I'm sorry all of this happened." "It's not your fault," Isabelle said quietly. "You were protecting us." Were they, though? Evelyn looked at these three children, her children now, in every way that mattered, and wondered if protection had just been a justification for pride. Maybe Margot had been right. Maybe exposing everything had made them all more vulnerable. But it was done now. The choice made. The consequences set in motion. All they could do was survive what came next. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed beside Cedric, both too wired to sleep, too exhausted to do anything else, she voiced the question that had been haunting her. "Did we do the right thing?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know we did the only thing we could live with. Even if it gets us killed? Even then." She rolled toward him. Their faces were close in the darkness. "I meant what I said, about not being able to forgive you completely, about trust being broken. I know, but I also meant what I said about staying, about fighting for this family, whatever that costs." He reached for her hand, found it, held it like an anchor. "Then we fight, together, until there's nothing left to fight for, or we finally won." She squeezed his fingers. "Deal." Outside, guards patrolled. Assassins potentially regrouped. Enemies plotted their next move. But inside, in this room, two people who'd survived impossible odds held on to each other and chose to believe that honesty might actually be worth all the blood it cost. And in the nursery down the hall, three children slept, dreaming of a world where families told the truth, where mistakes were admitted, where love was stronger than secrets. A world their parents were trying to build from the ruins of the one that had almost destroyed them. The morning would bring new threats, new challenges, new proof that breaking systems came with consequences no one could predict. But tonight, they'd survived. And sometimes survival was enough. The messenger arrived at dawn. Evelyn was already awake, hadn't really slept, was staring at the ceiling counting all the ways their enemies might strike next. The knock on the door made her sit up sharply. "Your Grace." The servant's voice was urgent. "A rider from the crown." "He says it's urgent." She dressed quickly, found Cedric already in the hall, both of them moving toward the study where the messenger waited. The man was young, exhausted, his clothes suggesting he'd ridden through the night. He bowed quickly. Your Graces, I have news from the capital. After yesterday's proceedings, several noble families have filed formal complaints against you. They're claiming defamation, extortion, and conspiracy to undermine the crown's authority. How many families? Cedric asked. 17. And they're calling for a tribunal. Once you both stripped of titles and lands, your children declared illegitimate, your entire estate dissolved. Evelyn's blood went cold. They're trying to destroy us legally. The messenger nodded. The king has granted the tribunal. It convenes in 1 week. You have 7 days to prepare your defense. He left. The door closed. Evelyn and Cedric stood in the study as dawn light crept through windows, illuminating the scope of what they were facing. 17 families, all united against them, all with resources and connections and decades of experience manipulating the legal system. We can't win this, Cedric said quietly. Not in a week. Not against that many. Evelyn looked at the documents scattered across his desk. Evidence they'd gathered, secrets they'd exposed. The ammunition that had brought down Margot, but apparently wasn't enough to protect them from coordinated retaliation. Then we changed the game, she said. How? By making sure if we go down, we take everyone with us. She turned to face him. We've been fighting defensively, trying to prove we deserve to survive. But that's not how you win against people like this. So what do? We go on the offensive. We expose everything, not just the families attacking us, everyone. Every noble family in the kingdom, every secret, every scandal, every buried body. We burn the entire system down and dare them to try building it back. Cedric stared at her. That's insane, probably, but it's the only move they won't see coming. Her voice was hard. They think we're cornered, desperate. They think we'll spend this week preparing legal arguments. Instead, we spend it gathering every piece of damaging information we can find on every family at court. And when that tribunal convenes, we don't defend ourselves. We put the entire nobility on trial. You're talking about starting a revolution. I'm talking about survival. She met his eyes. They've left us no choice. Either we destroy the system that's trying to destroy us, or we let it grind our children into dust. Which would you prefer? He was quiet for a long moment, then, how do we even gather that much information in 7 days? We don't. She pulled out Thomas's ledgers. We already have it. Thomas has been keeping records for 40 years. He knows where every body is buried. We just need to organize it and make it public. This will make us enemies of everyone. We're already enemies of everyone. This just makes it official. Cedric nodded slowly. Then let's burn it all down. Mug. The next 7 days were chaos. Thomas pulled every record he'd ever kept. Servants were sent to investigate leads. Evelyn contacted every person who'd ever been wronged by nobility. Every mother paid off, every child abandoned, every servant silenced, and promised them protection if they'd testify. The evidence piled up faster than they could organize it. Hundreds of scandals, thousands of crimes, generations of nobility protecting each other while ordinary people suffered. By day 6, they had enough to destroy every major family in the kingdom 3 times over. On day 7, they loaded it all into wagons and prepared to return to court. The night before the tribunal, Evelyn stood in the nursery watching the children sleep. Oliver and Lucien curled together in one bed, Isabelle clutching a stuffed horse in another. So peaceful, so innocent of what tomorrow would bring. Cedric joined her at the door. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly, I want you to know I'm proud of what we've built, of who you've become. Don't, she said. Don't do the goodbye speech. We're going to survive this. I hope so, but in case we don't, we will. Her voice was fierce. Because we have to. Because those children need us. Because I refuse to let bastards who value reputation over human life win. Then tomorrow, we fight. Tomorrow, we end this. They stood in the darkness, watching their children breathe, and prepared for the battle that would determine everything. Because here's what Evelyn had learned over 3 years of digging up secrets and surviving assassination attempts and standing before courts that wanted her destroyed. Power wasn't about being loved or feared or respected. Power was about being willing to lose everything for something that mattered more than survival. And tomorrow, she was going to show every noble in that tribunal exactly what that looked like. Even if it meant burning down the kingdom to do it. The tribunal convened at noon on the 7th day, in the grand hall where nobility had been deciding the fates of lesser people for 300 years. Every seat was filled, every major family represented. the air thick with anticipation, not of justice, but of blood. Evelyn and Cedric entered together, flanked by guards carrying the wagons of evidence. The crowd murmured. 17 families sat in the prosecution section, their lawyers arranged like an army. At the center sat the king, looking older than he had a week ago, as if the weight of what he was about to witness had aged him in advance. Duke and Duchess Ashbourne, the magistrate began, you stand accused of defamation, extortion, and conspiracy against the crown. How do you plead? Cedric stood, his voice carried through the hall. Not guilty, Your Honor. But before we begin our defense, we'd like to present evidence that reframes these charges entirely. The magistrate frowned. That's highly irregular. So is 17 families coordinating to destroy one? Evelyn said coolly. Yet here we are. Proceed. But be brief. Brief. They had 7 wagons of documentation proving generations of corruption, and they were told to be brief. Evelyn almost laughed. Instead, she nodded to Thomas, who began distributing documents to every person in the room. Copies of everything. Birth records. Death certificates. Financial transactions. Testimony from mothers who'd been paid off. Servants who'd been silenced. Children who'd been abandoned. What you're holding, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the growing noise, is documentation of 300 years of systematic abuse. Not by one family, by all of us. Every scandal we've exposed about the Ashbourne family, it's replicated across every noble house in this kingdom. We're not outliers. We're the norm. This is outrageous. Lord Pemberton stood. You cannot drag every family through the mud to save yourself. Why not? Cedric's voice was hard. You dragged us here to destroy my family for doing exactly what yours has done for generations. The only difference is we admitted it. He gestured to the documents. My father was poisoned by nobles who felt threatened by his influence, covered up his fever. My aunt spent 50 years managing scandals that should have resulted in criminal charges. And every family in this room has similar stories. Children hidden or killed, women silenced or disappeared. Crimes buried under the weight of title and tradition. The room erupted in shouting, denials, accusations, chaos. The magistrate banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! The noise died slowly, everyone still clutching documents that detailed their family's darkest secrets. The king leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Duke Ashbourne? That we ignore centuries of precedent, tear down the entire social structure? No, Your Majesty. Evelyn stepped forward. We're proposing something simpler. Accountability. Not just for us. For everyone. You want to strip our titles for exposing corruption? Fine. But every family documented in those papers faces the same scrutiny, the same consequences, no exceptions. That would destroy the nobility. Perhaps. Or perhaps it would force us to evolve into something worth preserving. She looked around the room. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue protecting each other's crimes while innocent people suffer, or we can admit the system is broken and actually fix it. How noble, one of the lawyers sneered, threatening mutually assured destruction and calling it reform. It's not a threat, Cedric said quietly. It's a choice. Destroy us if you want. But understand that our destruction means everyone's secrets become public. Every family in this room faces investigation. Every scandal exposed. You can have your victory, but you'll burn alongside us. The silence that followed was suffocating. The 17 families huddled with their lawyers, whispered conversations that grew increasingly heated. Several nobles stood and left the room entirely, their faces pale. The king watched it all with an expression Evelyn couldn't read. Finally, he spoke. This tribunal is adjourned. I need time to consider these developments. Your Majesty, Pemberton started. Adjourned. The word was final. Everyone filed out slowly. The weight of what had just happened settling over them like snow, quiet, relentless, transforming everything it touched. Whoosh. They returned to the palace not knowing if they'd won or lost, just knowing they'd changed something fundamental, broken something that couldn't be repaired in the old way. The children were waiting in the main hall, their faces anxious. All 3 rushed forward when Evelyn and Cedric entered. What happened? Oliver demanded. We told the truth, Evelyn said simply. Now we wait to see if truth is enough. It was Isabelle who asked the question that mattered. Are we safe? Evelyn looked at Cedric. Neither of them knew how to answer that honestly. We're together, Cedric said finally. That's the only safety that matters. 3 days passed. The palace felt like a tomb. Servants whispered. Guards stayed alert. Every messenger that arrived sent Evelyn's heart racing. On the 4th day, Thomas brought news. The tribunal has reached a decision. You're summoned back to court tomorrow. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching stars wheel overhead and thought about everything that had led to this moment, every choice, every compromise, every time she'd chosen truth over comfort. Had it been worth it? If tomorrow ended with their titles stripped and their children declared illegitimate, could she honestly say the cost had been justified? You're thinking too hard, Cedric said from the bed. I'm thinking the right amount for someone whose entire life might end tomorrow. It won't end. He sat up. Whatever happens, we adapt, we survive. We've done it before. Before we had options. Now we've burned every bridge. Then we build new ones. He crossed to stand beside her. Evelyn, 3 years ago I was a man so trapped in my own lies I couldn't see daylight. You forced me into honesty, dragged me kicking and screaming toward something better. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm grateful for that. Even if it costs us everything, especially then, because at least we'll lose it having tried to be better than we were. She leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Outside, night slowly gave way to dawn, the last one before everything changed. The throne room was packed again, but the energy was different, quieter, more somber, like people had come to witness a funeral rather than a trial. The king entered and everyone stood. He looked exhausted. Whatever decision he'd reached had clearly cost him. Duke and Duchess Ashbourne, he began without preamble, I have reviewed all evidence presented, consulted with advisors, prayed for wisdom I do not possess, and I have reached a conclusion that will satisfy no one. Here it comes, Evelyn thought, the compromise that destroys us while protecting everyone else. After careful consideration, the king continued, I find that the charges against you, defamation, extortion, conspiracy, are technically accurate. You did threaten exposure. You did leverage information for protection. By the letter of the law, you are guilty. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Beside her, Cedric went rigid. However, the king's voice hardened. I also find that the system you threaten to expose is itself guilty of far greater crimes. Crimes that have been ignored for generations because we valued stability over justice, comfort over accountability. He stood, and suddenly he looked less like an exhausted old man and more like a king who'd remembered what the title actually meant. Therefore, I am ordering a complete reform of noble oversight. Every family will face investigation. Every scandal documented in the evidence presented will be reviewed. Those found guilty of crimes, actual crimes, not just moral failings, will face appropriate punishment. No exceptions, no protections. The room erupted. Nobles shouting, lawyers protesting. Chaos threatening to overwhelm the proceedings. The king's voice cut through it all. And as for Duke and Duchess Ashbourne, your titles are hereby retained, your children legitimized, your estate remains intact. Consider it payment for services rendered in exposing a corruption this court should have addressed decades ago. Evelyn couldn't breathe. They'd won. Against every odd, they'd actually won. But the king wasn't finished. However, he said, and the room quieted again. You will personally oversee the investigations. You will ensure every family, including your own, faces the same scrutiny. You wanted accountability? Now you're responsible for enforcing it. Let's see if you have the stomach for it when you're not fighting for survival. It was a brilliant move. Gave them victory while ensuring they'd make enemies of everyone by doing the actual work. But Evelyn found herself nodding. We accept, Your Majesty. Good. Court is dismissed. The next 6 months were brutal. Investigations revealed scandals that made the Ashbourne family's mistakes look tame by comparison. Children who'd been murdered rather than hidden. Women who'd disappeared and were never found. Crimes that stretched back generations, buried under titles and tradition. Some families fell. Titles stripped. Estates seized. Several nobles fled the kingdom rather than face charges. Others reformed, acknowledged their bastards, made amends where possible, learned to operate in a world where reputation mattered less than actual behavior. The Ashbourne family became simultaneously the most powerful and most hated in the kingdom. People came to them for justice because they'd proven they couldn't be bought. But they also blamed them for destroying the comfortable lives everyone had been living with. Eveline weathered it the way she'd learned to weather everything, with her spine straight and her focus on what mattered. The children, the truth, the slowly emerging possibility that maybe they were actually building something worth the cost. But it took its toll. She lost weight, stopped sleeping properly, spent so many hours reviewing evidence and testimonies that her eyes ached constantly. There were days she wanted to walk away from all of it, return to the simpler time when her biggest concern was planning nursery decoration. But she couldn't. Not when women who'd been silenced for decades were finally being heard. Not when children who'd grown up thinking they were worthless were being acknowledged. Not when the system that had crushed so many people was finally being held accountable. One evening, 8 months after the tribunal, Thomas found her in the study surrounded by papers. "Your Grace," he said gently, "you need to rest. I need to finish this case first. The case will still be there tomorrow. Will the woman testifying tomorrow still have courage if I don't prepare properly?" She rubbed her eyes. "These people trusted us, Thomas. Trusted that we'd actually follow through. I can't let them down. You're killing yourself. Better me than them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The Duchess who walked into that family council a year ago would have said the same thing. The question is whether you've changed or just found a different way to destroy yourself." That landed harder than it should have. Eveline set down her pen. "Am I wrong? To keep pushing this?" "No. But you're human, and humans need rest, need moments that aren't about fighting. Otherwise, you'll win every battle and lose yourself in the process." She looked at the stacks of evidence, the endless documentation of pain and injustice that she'd promised to address. It felt overwhelming, impossible. Like trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. "How do you bear it?" she asked quietly. 40 years of knowing all this existed and being unable to stop it. Thomas sat down across from her. "I remind myself that perfect justice is impossible. That all we can do is make things marginally better than they were. That surviving to fight tomorrow matters more than winning everything today. That sounds like giving up. It sounds like wisdom. There's a difference." That night, she went to check on the children, found them in the library, Oliver reading to Isabelle and Lucian, all three curled together on the sofa. They looked up when she entered. "Mama," Lucian said. He'd started calling her that 6 months ago, and it still made her chest ache. "Are you done working for tonight? Can you read to us?" She almost said no, had reports to review, testimonies to prepare. But something in Oliver's expression stopped her. A wariness that suggested he was watching her the same way she'd watched Cedric years ago, checking for cracks, measuring distance. She sat down and pulled Lucian onto her lap. "What are we reading?" Oliver handed her the book, something about dragons and princesses and adventures that bore no resemblance to the brutal reality she'd been living in. She read until all three children fell asleep against her. Then she just sat there, feeling their warmth, their breathing, the simple, uncomplicated trust they still had despite everything. This was why. Not the justice, or the reform, or the satisfaction of holding people accountable. Just this. Children who could sleep peacefully because someone had fought to make the world slightly less terrible. Cedric found her there an hour later. He sat beside her without speaking, and together they watched their children dream. "We did it," he said finally. "Not perfectly, not completely, but we actually changed things." Did we? Or did we just rearrange the same problems into a slightly different configuration? Does it matter? People who had no voice have one now. Children who were hidden are acknowledged. Women who were silenced are heard. That's not nothing. No. She looked at him. It's not nothing. They sat in comfortable silence until Cedric spoke again. "I never apologized properly. For putting you in this position, for all the lies that led here. You've apologized 1,000 times. Not for the right thing." He met her eyes. "I'm not sorry for the mistakes I made before I met you. I was young and stupid, and those women deserved better. But I am sorry for lying to you, for making you complicit in secrets you didn't choose, for forcing you to become someone harder than you wanted to be. I chose to become this person, only because I didn't give you better options." He reached for her hand. "You were supposed to be my wife, my partner. Instead, you became my conscience, my accountability, the person who had to drag me into decency because I couldn't get there myself. That's not entirely true. It's true enough. He squeezed her fingers. I spent 3 years watching you transform from a woman who wanted a quiet life into someone who could stand before the entire court and threaten to burn it all down. And I'm proud of you, but I'm also sorry you had to become that. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm not sorry. You're not? No. She shifted carefully, trying not to wake Lucian. I'm grateful. Because that quiet life you think I wanted? It would have destroyed me slowly, killed me with comfort and complacency. This, she gestured at the sleeping children, the palace around them, the world they'd fought to change. This is brutal and exhausting, and sometimes I hate it, but it's real. I'm real. For the first time in my life, I'm not just playing a role. I'm actually doing something that matters. Even though it cost us everything, we didn't lose everything. We lost the illusion of safety, the comfort of ignorance, the luxury of not caring. But what we gained, she looked at the children, we gained truth, honesty, the knowledge that our children will grow up in a world that's marginally less terrible because we had the courage to break things that needed breaking. Cedric was quiet. Then, I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. They sat together until dawn crept through the windows, neither willing to move and wake the children, both content to exist in this small moment of peace before the world demanded their attention again. Mars. 2 years after the tribunal, the reforms were mostly complete. The system wasn't perfect, systems never were, but it was better, functioning, holding people accountable in ways that would have been impossible before. The Ashbourne family's reputation remained complicated. Some viewed them as heroes, others as traitors who'd destroyed centuries of tradition. Most just saw them as the people you went to when you needed something done and didn't care about making friends in the process. Evelyn had made peace with that. You couldn't change the world and remain universally liked. Had to choose between being respected and being feared and being effective. She'd chosen effective and learned to live with the consequences. The children grew. Oliver at 12 was serious and thoughtful, the kind of boy who noticed when servants were struggling and quietly helped without being asked. Isabelle at 9 had lost much of her wariness, though she still checked exits and kept her emotional cards close. Lucian at 5 was pure chaos energy, causing trouble with the kind of enthusiasm that made guards groan and Evelyn hide smiles. They were good kids, not perfect. They fought and complained and occasionally did things that required serious conversations about responsibility. But they were honest, brave, willing to stand up for what mattered. Everything she and Cedric had fought for, embodied in 3 children who'd never know how close they'd come to growing up in a very different world. One afternoon, Evelyn found Cedric in the garden, watching the children play. He looked older now, gray threading through his dark hair, lines carved around his eyes, but also more at peace, like someone who'd finally stopped running from himself. "You're thinking too hard," she said, echoing his words from years ago. "Just remembering." He gestured to the children, thinking about how different this could have been. She slipped her hand into his. It was different. It was terrible and brutal, and we almost died multiple times. But we didn't. No, we didn't. They watched Oliver help Isabelle climb a tree, while Lucian ran circles around them both, shrieking with laughter. "Do you regret it?" Cedric asked. "Any of it?" Evelyn considered. The honest answer was complicated. She regretted the pain, the fear. The night she'd lain awake wondering if her choices would get her children killed. She regretted becoming someone harder than she'd ever wanted to be. Regretted that winning had required her to learn cruelty disguised as necessity. But she didn't regret the outcome. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret doing it." Cedric pulled her close. "Neither do I." From across the garden, Oliver spotted them and waved. Evelyn waved back, and something about the simple gesture, the normalcy of it, made her chest tight. This was what they'd fought for. Not grand justice or systemic reform or historical significance. Just this. Children playing in sunlight. A family that told the truth. A world where people could look each other in the eye without wondering what secrets were being hidden behind smiles. It was enough. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn stood in her chambers looking at the dress that had started everything. The one with Lucian's name embroidered inside, Celine's inadvertent declaration that secrets existed and were getting harder to contain. She'd kept it all these years. A reminder of who she'd been when this started. A woman who'd believed in simple truths and clean answers. Who'd thought justice was possible if you just tried hard enough. She knew better now. Knew that justice was messy and incomplete and required compromises that kept you awake at night. Knew that changing systems meant becoming part of the machinery you wanted to destroy. Knew that victory often looked a lot like survival and you had to make peace with that or go insane trying to achieve perfection. The scars of 3 years showed on her in ways mirrors couldn't capture. The wariness in her eyes. The calculation in her smiles. The way she instinctively checked exits and assessed threats and never fully relaxed even in her own home. She'd become dangerous. Harder than she'd ever wanted to be. Someone who could threaten 17 families with destruction and mean every word. But she'd also become someone who could protect her children. Who could stand between them and a world designed to crush anyone who challenged it. Who could look at systems that had existed for centuries and say, no, we're doing this differently now. That mattered more than the cost. Cedric entered, already dressed for bed. He saw her holding the dress and understood immediately. Thinking about throwing it away? Thinking about keeping it. As a reminder. Of what? Of how far we've come. How much we've changed. She folded it carefully. Of the woman I was who thought one dress and one secret was the worst thing that could happen. You survived worse than one secret. We survived worse. She corrected him gently. Together. He crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace that felt earned rather than assumed. They'd spent 3 years rebuilding trust piece by painful piece, learning how to be honest even when it hurt. Figuring out if love could survive being dragged through hell and emerging on the other side scarred but functional. Turned out it could. Not easily. Not perfectly. But it could. I meant what I said earlier, Cedric murmured against her hair. About being grateful you forced me to be better. Even though it nearly killed us both. Would you do it again? If you could go back knowing everything that would happen? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, yes. Because the alternative was staying who I was. And that person would have destroyed everything eventually. At least this way we got to choose our destruction. Shape it into something that mattered. That's a very dark way of looking at survival. We're very dark people now. Comes with the territory. She laughed despite herself. When did we become the kind of people who threaten entire courts with mutually assured destruction? Somewhere between the second assassination attempt and the fourth secret child, probably. They held each other in the quiet darkness. Two people who'd been forged in fire and learned to bear the weight of what they'd become. The next morning would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges. But tonight they had this. The certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. See it. 5 years after the tribunal, the kingdom had settled into its new normal. The reforms had stuck. The oversight committees functioned. People still complained about accountability being inconvenient, but they couldn't argue with the results. Fewer children disappeared. Fewer women were silenced. Fewer families operated like they were above consequences. It wasn't perfect. Never would be. But it was better. Measurably, tangibly better. The Ashbourne children grew into the people their parents had fought to protect. Oliver at 15 was being trained in estate management, already showing the kind of steady leadership that suggested he'd be a good duke someday. Isabelle at 12 had discovered a talent for mathematics and was driving her tutors insane with questions about engineering and architecture. Lucian at 8 was still chaos, but channeling it into sports and competitions that burned energy without causing property damage. They knew their family's history, not in abstract terms but in concrete detail, knew about the hidden siblings, the lies, the near destruction that had almost torn everything apart. Cedric and Evelyn had made the decision to tell them early. Let them understand that families were complicated, that parents made mistakes, that redemption was possible but required constant work. The children had taken it better than expected, maybe because they'd grown up in a household where honesty was valued even when it was ugly, maybe because they'd seen firsthand what happened when secrets festered. One evening, sitting around the dinner table, all 5 of them together, which was increasingly rare as the children got older, Oliver asked the question that had probably been building for years. Do you regret having us, given everything that happened? The question hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn looked at Cedric. He looked back. Some conversations required unity. No, Cedric said firmly. Never. You three are the best things I've ever done. Everything else, the lies, the scandals, the near-death experiences, those are the cost of making sure you existed and were protected. Worth it, every time. Even when people tried to kill you? Isabelle asked. Her voice was matter-of-fact. She'd become someone who dealt with difficult truths by examining them clinically. Especially then, Evelyn said, because it meant we were doing something that mattered enough to threaten people who deserved to be threatened. That's a weird way to parent, Lucian observed. Probably. But it's honest. She smiled. We could have lied, could have pretended everything was perfect and hidden all the ugly parts. But then you'd grow up thinking families are supposed to be perfect, that mistakes are unforgivable, that redemption isn't possible. Oliver nodded slowly. So instead you showed us that adults are complicated, that people can be terrible and still worth loving, that systems can be broken and still worth fixing. Exactly. That's, actually pretty smart. Don't sound so surprised. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Oliver spoke again. I'm going to do better. When I'm Duke, learn from your mistakes without repeating them. That's all we can ask, Cedric said quietly, that each generation does marginally better than the last. No pressure, though, Lucian added. Just be perfect or you'll destroy the kingdom. No one's asking for perfect, Evelyn said. Just honest, brave enough to admit mistakes and fix them. That's the only real legacy that matters. 10 years after the tribunal, Evelyn stood in the same garden where she'd once watched the children play and marveled at how much everything had changed. Oliver was 20, preparing to take over more estate responsibilities. Isabelle, at 17, was being courted by universities interested in her mathematical proofs. Lucien, at 13, was finally channeling his energy into something productive. He'd discovered a talent for diplomacy that suggested he might actually be useful someday. They'd survived. All of them. Not just physically, but emotionally. They'd built something real from the wreckage of secrets and lies. Something that might actually last. Cedric found her there, his hair mostly gray now, his face showing every year they'd lived through together. He looked distinguished, happy in a way that seemed hard-earned rather than assumed. Thinking about the past? Thinking about the future, actually. What happens when we're gone and they're the ones making decisions? They'll be fine. We raise them right. We raise them honest. That's not always the same as right. It's close enough. He stood beside her. They'll make mistakes. Everyone does. But they'll face them head-on instead of hiding. That's what matters. Evelyn leaned against him. Do you think we did enough? Changed enough? I think we changed what we could. The rest is up to them. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the estate they'd fought so hard to protect. The world kept turning. Systems kept functioning. People kept making mistakes and trying to fix them. And in the palace behind them, 3 children who'd been born into scandal and raised in the aftermath of near destruction were growing into adults who understood that power meant responsibility. That truth mattered more than comfort. That sometimes you had to burn everything down to build something better. Not a perfect legacy, but an honest one. And in the end, honesty was the only thing worth fighting for. The final memory Evelyn would carry into old age came on a quiet afternoon 15 years after the tribunal. She was in the library, sorting through documents for the historical archive they'd established. A comprehensive record of everything that had happened, preserved so future generations would understand the cost of reform. She found a letter. Old, yellowed, written in her own hand years ago. A draft she'd never sent, composed the night before the tribunal when she'd thought they might actually lose everything. It was addressed to the children. She read it slowly, remembering the fear and determination that had driven her to write it. Instructions for if she and Cedric died. Explanations of why they'd made the choices they'd made. Apologies for the danger they'd put their children in, hopes for the future they might not live to see. The letter ended with a single line. Be braver than we were, but kinder to yourselves. She'd forgotten writing that. Forgotten the specific fear that had motivated it. But reading it now, she understood something she hadn't fully grasped at the time. They'd won. Not just the tribunal or the reforms or the battles against families who'd wanted them destroyed. They'd won the right to keep existing, to keep trying, to keep building something better despite all the forces working against them. And their children, those 3 people who'd started as complications and scandals and problems to be solved, had become proof that redemption was possible, that people could grow beyond their origins. that families could heal even from wounds that seemed mortal. Cedric found her crying over the letter. He read it over her shoulder, then pulled her close. "We were so scared," she said. "We had reason to be. But we did it anyway, because the alternative was unacceptable." He kissed her forehead. "You were magnificent. Terrifying and brilliant and absolutely magnificent. We were desperate. Same thing sometimes." She folded the letter carefully and added it to the archive. Let history judge whether their desperation had been magnificence or just survival instinct elevated to art. That evening, all 5 of them gathered for dinner one last time before Oliver left to establish his own household. The meal was chaotic. Lucian and Isabelle arguing about something, Oliver trying to mediate, Cedric making terrible jokes, Evelyn watching it all with the bittersweet awareness that these moments were finite. At one point, Oliver raised his glass. "To family," he said simply, "the kind you're born into and the kind you build from wreckage." Everyone drank, even Lucian, who made a face at the wine but participated anyway. And Evelyn looked around the table at these people she'd fought so hard to protect and thought this was why. Not the justice or the reform or the historical significance, just this. People who loved each other despite knowing all the ugly truth. Who chose each other not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the real victory. Everything else was just details. Okay. Years later, when historians would analyze the period of noble reform, they'd focus on the systemic changes, the legal precedents, the political maneuvering. They'd write treatises about power structures and social evolution and the inevitable progression toward accountability. They'd miss the truth that Evelyn had learned through 3 years of hell and a decade of aftermath. Change happened because people chose to be uncomfortable, because someone decided that the cost of fighting was less than the cost of complicity, because ordinary people in impossible situations found courage they didn't know they possessed and used it to break things that needed breaking. The Ashbourne family's legacy wasn't the reforms they'd forced or the scandals they'd exposed. It was 3 children who grew up understanding that power meant responsibility, that secrets destroyed more than they protected, that truth was worth fighting for even when it cost everything. Evelyn never wrote her memoirs, never tried to explain or justify or frame what they'd done for history. The evidence spoke for itself. The children spoke for themselves. The slowly improving world spoke loudest of all. On her last evening, many years after the tribunal, after the children had grown and scattered and built their own lives, Cedric sat beside her bed and asked if she had any regrets. She thought about it carefully. About the woman she'd been who'd received a dress with her son's name embroidered inside and thought that was the worst betrayal possible. About the woman she'd become who could threaten 17 families with destruction and mean every word. About everything she'd learned and lost and gained in the years between. Only one, she said finally. What? That it took a crisis to make us honest with each other. That we couldn't have chosen this path before things got desperate. We weren't capable of it before. Cedric's voice was gentle. We had to become different people first. I suppose that's true. She squeezed his hand. Do you think the children will be all right after we're gone? They'll be better than all right. We made sure of that. She smiled. We did, didn't we? They sat in comfortable silence as evening deepened into night. 2 people who'd fought their way through hell and emerged scarred but intact. Who'd learned that love survived when it was built on truth rather than comfortable lies. Who'd proven that systems could change if someone was brave enough to break them first. Not a perfect ending, but an honest one. And in the end, honesty was all that mattered. The dress with Lucian's name embroidered inside remained in the family archive, a reminder of where it all started. Of the moment one secret cracked open and revealed the fault lines running through an entire system. Future generations would look at it and wonder how something so small had triggered something so large. Would try to understand the courage it took to choose destruction over complicity. Would hopefully learn that sometimes burning everything down was the only way to build something worth keeping. But that was for them to figure out. For Evelyn and Cedric, the work was done. The children were grown. The world was measurably better than it had been. They'd survived long enough to see the fruits of their desperate gamble. And as the sun set on the last day of their story, they held each other and remembered. Not with regret or triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of people who'd done what they could with what they had. Who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves into something stronger. Who'd learned that the only real power was the courage to be honest even when honesty cost everything. That was their legacy. Not the reforms or the scandals or the historical footnotes. Just 3 children who understood that families were complicated and love was choice, and truth was worth fighting for no matter the cost. Everything else was just noise. And in the silence that followed, as stars appeared in the darkening sky, 2 people who'd loved each other through impossible odds finally allowed themselves to rest. The fight was over. They'd won the only victory that mattered, and that was enough.